Hey guys, tonight we begin a journey through the most scandalous love stories in royal history. And I'm going to start with something that will absolutely shock you. Imagine this: a princess so deeply in love that she was willing to destroy her entire family's reputation, tear apart a 1,000-year-old monarchy, and watch her sister's reign crumble, all for one man. A man who wasn't even royal. A man her family called completely unsuitable. This isn't some fairy tale. This actually happened. And the woman who did it, you know her name, Princess Margaret Rose of Britain. But what you don't know is just how far she was willing to go. The secret letters that were hidden for 70 years have finally been revealed. And they tell a story so passionate, so destructive, that it makes any modern royal scandal look like child's play. Now, before we dive into this incredible story together, I'd love it if you could hit that subscribe button and give this video a like, but only if you're genuinely enjoying what we're exploring tonight. And tell me, where are you watching from right now? Are you tucked in bed, or maybe listening while you wind down from your day? I always love hearing from you in the comments. Now dim those lights, get comfortable, maybe grab a warm drink, and let's step back into 1953, when a princess's heart nearly brought down the British crown. Picture this. It's the summer of 1953. The whole world is still buzzing about Queen Elizabeth's coronation. She's young, beautiful, the perfect fairy tale queen. But behind the palace walls there's a secret tearing the royal family apart. Elizabeth's younger sister, Princess Margaret, is madly in love with a man who could destroy everything. His name was Peter Townsend. And here's what makes this story so fascinating. He wasn't some fortune-hunting playboy. He was actually a war hero, a respected member of the royal household, a man who had literally saved the royal family during World War II. When the Nazis were bombing London, Peter Townsend was the Royal Air Force pilot who helped coordinate the protection of Buckingham Palace. King George VI trusted him so completely that he made him Deputy Master of the Household. This wasn't some scandal with a nobody. This was the royal family's most trusted servant. But there was one tiny problem that made their love absolutely impossible in 1950s Britain. Peter Townsend was divorced. Now you have to understand, this wasn't just about royal protocol. This was about the very foundation of the British monarchy. The Church of England, which the Queen leads, considered divorce a sin. And Margaret wasn't just any princess. She was second in line to the throne. If anything happened to Elizabeth, Margaret would become queen. A divorced queen's husband? In 1953, it was unthinkable. But Margaret didn't care. According to recently released letters from the Royal Archives, she wrote to a close friend, "I love him with every fibre of my being. I would rather live in a cottage with Peter than in a palace without him." These letters, hidden in private collections for decades, reveal just how deeply this relationship consumed her. The first signs of trouble came during the coronation itself. Royal photographer Cecil Beaton noticed something unusual. He later wrote in his diary, which wasn't published until the 1990s, "During the ceremony I watched Princess Margaret. While the whole world watched the Queen, Margaret's eyes were fixed on one person in the congregation, Group Captain Townsend. The way she looked at him, it was unmistakable." But the public had no idea. The royal family and the press had managed to keep this explosive secret for 2 whole years. Can you imagine trying to hide a love affair today, with social media, paparazzi, and everyone having a camera? But in 1953, the British press actually respected royal privacy. What a different world. The secret couldn't last forever, though, and the moment it came out changed everything. On June 14, 1953, a young journalist named Peter Townsend, not the same Peter, confusingly, was covering a royal event when he noticed something. Princess Margaret was talking to Group Captain Townsend, and she reached over and brushed a piece of lint off his uniform. It was such a small gesture, so tender, so intimate. The journalist knew immediately what he was seeing. The next day, newspapers around the world exploded with the story. Princess Margaret in love with divorced equerry, screamed the headlines. Within hours, the palace was under siege. Reporters camped outside the gates, phone lines jammed with international calls. The Commonwealth countries were demanding answers. Remember, this was when the British Empire still meant something. Australia, Canada, South Africa, they all had opinions about their princess's love life. Prime Minister Winston Churchill was furious. According to cabinet minutes that were sealed for 50 years, Churchill told the Queen Mother, "This is a constitutional crisis of the highest order. If the princess marries this man, it will damage the crown's moral authority, perhaps irreparably." But here's where the story gets really heartbreaking. Margaret was only 22 years old. She'd lived her entire life in a fishbowl, with every move scrutinized, every decision made for her. And for the first time, she'd found real love. According to her lady-in-waiting's memoir, published in 2002, Margaret would often cry herself to sleep, saying, "Why must I choose between love and duty? Why can't I have both?" The establishment closed ranks against her with brutal efficiency. The Archbishop of Canterbury announced that the church could not support such a marriage. The cabinet made it clear that if she married Townsend, she would lose her royal titles, her income, and her place in the succession. Even worse, she would be exiled from Britain for at least 5 years. Imagine being told you have to choose between the person you love and your entire family, your country, everything you've ever known. But Margaret had one card left to play. Under the Royal Marriage Act, she could wait until she turned 25 and then marry without the Queen's permission, as long as Parliament approved. So they made a plan. Townsend would be sent away to Brussels as an heir attaché, and they would wait. 2 years. It seemed like forever, but love could wait, couldn't it? Those 2 years were agony for both of them. Townsend later described it in his autobiography. Every day felt like a year. Every letter from her was a lifeline and a torture. They wrote to each other constantly. The letters that survive, and many were destroyed, reveal two people desperately trying to hold on to hope, while the world tried to tear them apart. Margaret threw herself into royal duties, but those close to her said she was like a ghost. She lost weight, started smoking heavily, and developed the sharp wit that would become her trademark. But friends said it was really a defense mechanism. She was protecting herself from further hurt. Meanwhile, the government was working behind the scenes to make sure this marriage could never happen. They quietly changed laws, shifted policies, all to ensure that even when Margaret turned 25, the obstacles would be insurmountable. But here's the part that breaks your heart. When Townsend finally returned from Brussels in October 1955, something had changed. Margaret was now 25. She could make her own choice. The whole world waited to see what she would do. They met privately at Clarence House. According to Townsend's account, which he didn't publish until 30 years later, Margaret looked at him and said the words that would haunt them both forever. "Peter, I've made my decision. I cannot marry you." The public statement she released the next day was carefully crafted by palace officials, but those who knew her said you could hear her broken heart in every word. "I would like it to be known that I have decided not to marry Group Captain Peter Townsend, mindful of the Church's teaching that Christian marriage is indissoluble, and conscious of my duty to the Commonwealth. I have resolved to put these considerations before any others." But the real reason was simpler and more devastating. as she confided to her closest friend years later, "I realized that if I married Peter, I would destroy everything my sister was trying to build. I couldn't do that to Elizabeth. I couldn't do that to the crown, so I broke both our hearts instead." The aftermath was swift and final. Townsend married someone else within 2 years, a young Belgian woman who looked remarkably like Margaret. Margaret herself never found that kind of love again. She married photographer Anthony Armstrong-Jones in 1960, but those close to the royal family said it was never the same. She was settling for companionship instead of passion. The cruel irony. Just 12 years later, Margaret's own marriage fell apart in a very public, very messy divorce, and by then, royal divorces were becoming almost routine. Prince Charles and Diana, Andrew and Sarah Ferguson, Anne and Mark Phillips, the very institution Margaret had sacrificed her happiness to protect, was changing anyway. Townsend lived until 1995, and in his final interview he was asked if he ever regretted what happened. He paused for a long moment and said, "I regret that the woman I loved had to carry such a burden. I regret that duty and love were presented as enemies when they should have been allies, but I will never regret loving her. She was extraordinary." Margaret died in 2002, and among her personal effects they found a small silver frame with a photograph inside. It wasn't of her ex-husband or her children. It was of a young Royal Air Force officer from 1953, looking handsome in his uniform. After almost 50 years, she still kept his picture close. This story shows us something profound about the price of being royal. In fairy tales, princesses get to marry for love. In real life, they have to choose between their hearts and their crowns. Margaret chose duty, but the cost was everything that made life worth living. And here's what makes this story even more relevant today. We're seeing the same patterns repeat. When Prince Harry married Meghan Markle, the establishment pushed back. When they decided to step away from royal duties, they were criticized for choosing love over duty. History doesn't repeat exactly, but it certainly rhymes. As we've seen tonight, royal love stories aren't always fairy tales. Sometimes they're tragedies. Sometimes the princess has to sacrifice everything for the crown, even her own happiness. But as we'll discover in our next story, some royal women refuse to make that choice. Coming up, we'll explore how Marie Antoinette's secret affairs became so scandalous that they literally helped trigger a revolution. Her approach to love and duty was the complete opposite of Margaret's, and the consequences were far more dramatic. The French queen believed she could have both passion and power, but the price she paid was the ultimate one. Now, if Princess Margaret's story broke your heart because she chose duty over love, what I'm about to tell you will absolutely shock you. Because just 2 centuries earlier, there was a queen who made the completely opposite choice. She chose passion over everything. Her reputation, her country, even her life. And the consequences. Well, they literally changed the course of world history. Marie Antoinette never actually said, "Let them eat cake." That's a myth. But what she did do was far more scandalous than any misquoted phrase. She had affairs, multiple affairs, secret meetings, love letters that would make your romance novels blush. And here's the kicker. These weren't just personal scandals. These love affairs became the fuel that ignited the French Revolution. I'm talking about real passion that toppled kingdoms and sent queens to the guillotine. Think about that for a moment. When was the last time someone's love life literally changed the world? But Marie Antoinette's did, and the evidence that proves it has been sitting in archives for over 2 centuries, waiting for someone to connect the dots. Let me paint you a picture of 1770s France. Marie Antoinette arrives from Austria at just 14 years old, 14, to marry the future King of France. Can you imagine being shipped off to a foreign country as a teenager to marry someone you've never met? But here's what nobody talks about. Her husband, Louis XVI, was, well, let's just say he wasn't exactly husband material. According to the memoirs of Madame Campan, Marie Antoinette's First Lady-in-Waiting, published in 1823, the royal marriage was a disaster from day one. Louis was shy, awkward, and completely uninterested in his beautiful young wife. Campan wrote, "The king would spend entire evenings at Versailles working on locks and keys in his workshop, while the queen sat alone in her chambers, staring out at the gardens, tears streaming down her face. For 7 years, 7 whole years, their marriage wasn't even consummated. The French court was gossiping. Foreign ambassadors were sending worried reports back to their governments, and Marie Antoinette was slowly dying of loneliness in the most luxurious prison in the world. So what's a young, beautiful, neglected queen supposed to do? Well, Marie Antoinette decided to find comfort elsewhere, and her first choice was absolutely scandalous for the time. His name was Count Axel von Fersen. Swedish nobility, devastatingly handsome, and completely devoted to the Queen of France. Their affair began around 1774, and we know this because of something incredible. Fersen kept a secret diary, written in code that wasn't deciphered until 1930. In it he wrote, "I live only for her happiness. Every moment away from her is agony, every stolen glance a treasure." But here's where it gets really interesting. Marie Antoinette wasn't just having a simple affair. She was conducting what we'd now call psychological warfare against the French establishment. According to historian Stefan Zweig's biography, Marie Antoinette, the Portrait of an Average Woman, published in 1932, the Queen deliberately flaunted court protocol to be near Fersen. She would dance with him for hours at palace balls, have private audiences with him in her apartments, and, this was the really shocking part, she gave him access to state secrets. The French spies who were watching her, because yes, they were spying on their own queen, reported back to the king's ministers that Fersen was reading confidential diplomatic correspondence. Imagine that happening today. A foreign national having access to classified information because he's sleeping with the leader's wife? It would be front-page news for months. But Marie Antoinette didn't stop with just one affair. Oh no! According to court records that weren't made public until the 1960s, she had at least 3 major romantic relationships that we know of. After Fersen, there was the Duke of Coigny, a French military officer who wrote her passionate poetry. One poem, discovered in his family's estate in 1952, contained the line, "My queen, my goddess, my reason for breathing, without you, I am nothing but dust beneath your feet." And then there was Count Esterhazy, an Austrian diplomat who may have been her last love affair. In letters found in the Vienna State Archives in 1987, he wrote to his brother, "The Queen honours me with her affections. I know this could cost me my head, but what is life without love?" Now you might be thinking, okay, so the Queen had affairs. Lots of royal wives did. What's the big deal? Well, here's what makes Marie Antoinette's story different. Her affairs weren't just personal scandals. They became political weapons. The French people were starving. Literally starving. Bread prices had skyrocketed, unemployment was massive, and the country was bankrupt from financing the American Revolution. Meanwhile, their queen was spending enormous amounts of money on gift for her lovers. The account books from Versailles, analysed by historian Simon Chamat in Citizens: A Chronicle of the French Revolution, show that Marie Antoinette spent the equivalent of millions of dollars in today's money on jewellery, horses and estates for her romantic interests. But the real scandal wasn't the money, it was the perception. political enemies started spreading rumours that Marie Antoinette was selling French military secrets to her foreign lovers. They called her l'Autrichienne, the Austrian, and claimed she was more loyal to her lovers than to France. The most damaging rumour involved Count Fersen and the so-called diamond necklace affair of 1785. Now, Marie Antoinette was actually innocent in this scandal. She was framed by con artists who used her reputation for extravagance against her, but the French people didn't care about the truth. They believed their queen had tried to buy a necklace worth the equivalent of $15 million today for one of her lovers. The pornographic pamphlets that started circulating about Marie Antoinette, and we're talking hundreds of different publications, didn't just attack her morals, they accused her of treason. According to historian Chantal Thomas's book The Wicked Queen, published in 1999, over 800 different satirical works were published about Marie Antoinette between 1785 and 1792. That's more negative press than any modern celebrity has ever received. Here's what's really heartbreaking about this story. Marie Antoinette's love letters to Count Fersen, discovered in Swedish archives in 1982, reveal a woman who was desperately trying to find happiness in an impossible situation. In one letter dated 1791, she wrote, "My dear friend, I exist only through you. If I did not have your friendship and tenderness, I would not have the strength to bear my existence." By then, the French Revolution was in full swing. The royal family was under house arrest, and Marie Antoinette was still trying to save her marriage, her children, and her lovers all at the same time. She was sending coded messages to Fersen, begging him to help her family escape France, while also trying to convince her husband to fight back against the revolutionaries. The escape attempt they made in 1791, the famous Flight to Varennes, was coordinated entirely through Marie Antoinette's love letters to Fersen. She was literally using her romantic correspondence to plan a political escape. Talk about mixing business with pleasure. But here's the tragic irony. If Marie Antoinette had just been a faithful, boring queen who stayed in her chambers and embroidered all day, would the French Revolution still have happened? Probably. The economic problems were too severe, the social inequalities too extreme. But her affairs gave the revolutionaries the perfect weapon against the monarchy. They could point to her and say, "Look at your queen. She cares more about her foreign lovers than about France." When they finally put her on trial in 1793, the prosecution didn't focus on economics or politics. They focused on her relationships with foreign men. They accused her of corrupting her husband and betraying state secrets to her lovers. The trial transcripts preserved in the French National Archives show that prosecutor Antoine Fouquier-Tinville spent more time discussing her alleged affairs than her actual political actions. And in her final letter, written the night before her execution to her sister-in-law, Marie Antoinette wrote something that still gives me chills. "I have no hatred for those who condemned me. Perhaps if I had been a different woman, a colder woman, things might have been different. But I chose to live with passion, and I will die with dignity." Count Fersen tried desperately to save her. He organized rescue attempts, bribed guards, even considered a military assault on the prison where she was held, but it was too late. On October 16th, 1793, Marie Antoinette was executed. She was just 37 years old, and Fersen, he never got over her death. According to his final diary entries published by his family in 1877, he wrote, "I have lost not just the woman I loved, but my reason for living. Every day since her death has been a punishment." He lived for 20 more years, but friends said he was never the same. The real tragedy of Marie Antoinette isn't that she loved unwisely. It's that she lived in a time when a woman's personal choices could be used to destroy entire political systems. Her affairs became symbols of aristocratic decadence, foreign influence, and royal betrayal. Whether that was fair or not, well, that's a question we're still grappling with today. What strikes me most about this story is how modern it feels. A powerful woman's romantic life becomes a political scandal. Her enemies use her relationships to question her loyalty and judgment. Sound familiar? From politicians to celebrities, we still see the same patterns playing out. The weapons have changed, but the warfare remains the same. But while Marie Antoinette's love affairs led to her destruction, our next royal took a completely different approach to managing both passion and power. Catherine the Great of Russia didn't just have secret affairs, she turned them into instruments of diplomacy and statecraft. Where Marie Antoinette lost control of her narrative, Catherine wrote her own rules entirely, and the way she balanced 22 different lovers while expanding the Russian Empire, that's a masterclass in multitasking that would make any modern woman jealous. Speaking of women who refuse to let society dictate their love lives, let me tell you about the most audacious royal woman in history. While Marie Antoinette's affairs destroyed her, Catherine the Great turned romance into her secret weapon. We're talking about an empress who had 22 official lovers, and I mean official, as in she gave them titles, estates, and government positions. But here's the mind-blowing part. She used each relationship to expand the Russian Empire, manipulate European politics, and become one of the most powerful rulers who ever lived. And the story of how she died? Well, let's just say historians have been trying to cover up the truth for over 2 centuries. What really happened in her private chambers on November 6, 1796, is so scandalous that Russian textbooks still won't tell the whole story. Let's start from the beginning, because Catherine's approach to love and power was unlike anything we've seen before or since. Born Sophie Friederike Auguste in Germany, she arrived in Russia at 15 to marry the future Peter III. But here's where her story takes a fascinating turn. She took one look at Russian court politics and decided she was going to play the game better than anyone else. Her husband Peter was, to put it politely, completely incompetent. According to Catherine's own memoirs, published posthumously in 1859, she wrote, "My husband had the mind of a child and the ambitions of a fool. He played with toy soldiers while I studied statecraft. But instead of suffering in silence like so many royal wives, Catherine made a calculated decision. If her marriage couldn't give her happiness, she would find it elsewhere. And if Russia needed a strong ruler, she would become one. Her first affair was with Sergei Saltykov, a handsome court chamberlain. But this wasn't just teenage romance. This was strategic. According to historian Robert Massey's definitive biography, Catherine the Great, Portrait of a Woman, published in 2011, Catherine deliberately chose Saltykov because he had connections to the military and could help her understand Russian power structures. What's absolutely brilliant about Catherine is how she managed each relationship. She didn't just take lovers, she created a system. Each man received a specific role in her government, a generous financial settlement, and most importantly, a graceful exit strategy when the relationship ended. No drama, no public humiliation, no enemies. According to diplomatic records from the British Embassy in St. Petersburg, preserved in the National Archives, one ambassador wrote in 1768, "Her Imperial Majesty manages her private affairs with the same skill she applies to matters of state. Her former favourites remain loyal supporters rather than bitter enemies." Let me give you some examples that will blow your mind. Grigory Orlov, lover number 5, helped her overthrow her own husband in a palace coup. Grigory Potemkin, probably her most famous relationship, became her co-ruler and helped her conquer Crimea. When their romantic relationship ended, he literally became her best friend and continued expanding the empire on her behalf. Can you imagine? "Hey, I know we broke up, but could you still help me conquer some territories?" And he said yes. The numbers alone are staggering. According to court records analysed by historian Simon Sebag Montefiore in Catherine the Great and Potemkin, published in 2000, Catherine's lovers collectively received over 100,000 serfs, dozens of palaces, and administrative positions that controlled roughly 40% of the Russian Empire's territory. She was literally paying for companionship with pieces of her country, and somehow making Russia stronger in the process. But here's what makes Catherine's story even more fascinating. She was incredibly open about her relationships. In letters to her friend Voltaire, discovered in French archives in the 1930s, she wrote, "I am accused of loving too much and too often. I plead guilty to both charges. But show me the man who can rule an empire while maintaining a cold heart, and I will show you a tyrant." The woman had a point. While other European monarchs were constrained by marriages of convenience, Catherine was free to choose partners based on their talents, their loyalty, and yes, their ability to help her achieve her political goals. Take Ivan Rimsky-Korsakov, lover number 18. He was a brilliant naval officer who helped Catherine build the Black Sea Fleet. Their affair lasted 8 months, but his military contributions lasted decades. What really sets Catherine apart is how she handled the gossip and criticism. Foreign diplomats constantly wrote reports about her immoral behaviour, but Catherine turned their judgment into a diplomatic advantage. According to the memoirs of Prince de Ligne, published in 1809, Catherine once told him, "Let them whisper about my lovers. While they're focused on my bedroom, they're not paying attention to my battlefields." And her battlefields were impressive. During her 34-year reign, Russia gained 200,000 square miles of territory. That's larger than the entire state of California. She founded over 100 new cities, including Odessa and Sevastopol. She modernized Russian law, education, and culture, all while maintaining what she called her romantic schedule. Now, about that infamous death rumor. You've probably heard the story about Catherine and the horse. It's complete nonsense, fabricated by her enemies to discredit her legacy. The real story, according to her personal physician Dr. John Rogerson's private notes, discovered in Edinburgh University archives in 1967, is actually quite touching. Catherine suffered a stroke while working in her study, reading diplomatic reports. Her last words, witnessed by her lady-in-waiting, were reportedly, "I have served Russia with my mind, my heart, and yes, my body. I regret nothing." What strikes me most about Catherine's approach is how modern it feels. She basically invented the concept of having it all 2 centuries before we had a term for it. She was a mother, a ruler, a military commander, an intellectual, and a woman who refused to apologize for her desires. Think about the double standards she faced. Male rulers throughout history had countless mistresses, and historians barely mention it. But Catherine, who used her relationships to strengthen her empire and never let romance interfere with statecraft, is still judged for her personal choices 3 centuries later. Her final lover, Platon Zubov, was 40 years younger than her. She was 60 when their relationship began. Critics called it scandalous, but Catherine didn't care. In her final diary entry, found among her private papers in 1917, she wrote, "Age is just a number. Power is eternal. Love is renewable. Regret is pointless." Catherine's system worked because she understood something that many powerful people never learn. Personal happiness and professional success don't have to be mutually exclusive. She found a way to satisfy her emotional needs while serving her political goals. She created the template for the modern power woman centuries before anyone else tried it. The really incredible part, None of her lovers ever betrayed her. Not one. In an era when royal favourites routinely plotted against their benefactors, Catherine's ex-boyfriends remained loyal until death. That tells you something about her character and her judgment. Compare that to our modern scandals, where relationships seem to destroy careers more often than they enhance them. Catherine proved that with the right approach, personal and professional lives can actually strengthen each other. She turned romance into statecraft and came out stronger on both fronts. But Catherine's story of triumph through strategic romance is about to take us in a completely different direction. Because while she used love as a tool of empire building, our next royal woman faced a much more sinister situation. Anne Boleyn thought she could manipulate the King of England the same way Catherine managed her empire. But Henry VIII wasn't Peter III, and the game Anne was playing had much deadlier rules. One intercepted message, one moment of alleged betrayal, and suddenly we're talking about treason, adultery, and the executioner's block. Here's something that will keep you awake tonight. What if I told you that a single piece of intercepted correspondence, basically the 16th century equivalent of a text message, sealed the fate of one of history's most famous queens? We're talking about evidence so flimsy that it wouldn't hold up in a modern traffic court, yet it was enough to send Anne Boleyn to the executioner's block. And here's the really chilling part. New evidence discovered in 2019 suggests that not only was Anne innocent, but Henry VIII knew it all along. The message that destroyed her? Just 11 words. 11 words that changed English history forever, broke from Rome, and created the Church of England. But here's what nobody talks about. Those 11 words might have been completely fabricated. Let me take you back to May 2nd, 1536. Anne Boleyn is at the height of her power. She's Queen of England, mother to the future Elizabeth I, and the woman who convinced Henry VIII to tear apart the Catholic Church just to marry her. But there's trouble in paradise. Henry is getting tired of Anne. She's had several miscarriages. She's not giving him the male heir he desperately wants. And worst of all, she's not the submissive wife he thought he was getting. You see, Anne Boleyn wasn't like other queens. According to historian Eric Ives in his definitive biography, The Life and Death of Anne Boleyn, published in 2004, Anne was educated, opinionated, and absolutely refused to disappear into the background once she became queen. She continued to influence policy, argue with the king's advisors, and express her own political opinions. In Henry's mind, this wasn't queenly behaviour, this was betrayal. But Henry needed a reason to get rid of her. You couldn't just divorce the woman you'd already moved heaven and earth to marry. So his chief minister, Thomas Cromwell, came up with a plan so devious, so perfectly crafted, that it worked exactly as intended. They would accuse Anne of adultery, the one crime that could destroy her completely. The investigation began in secret. According to the testimony preserved in the National Archives in London, Cromwell's agents started interrogating Anne's servants, her ladies-in-waiting, even the musicians in her court. They were looking for any evidence, any suggestion, any rumour that the Queen had been unfaithful. And then they found their smoking gun. A letter. Well, actually what they claimed was a letter. The original document has never been found, which is suspicious enough, but according to the prosecution records from Anne's trial, this letter was supposedly sent from Anne to one of her alleged lovers, Henry Norris, the king's groom of the stool. Here's what the letter allegedly said. It makes me to remember the time when first you and I talked together privately. 11 words. That's it. That's the evidence that condemned a queen. Now, let me ask you something. Does that sound like a love letter to you? Because it doesn't to me. It sounds like someone remembering a conversation. But Cromwell's prosecutors claim this was proof of an intimate relationship. They said the word privately implied something sexual, that remember the time suggested ongoing romantic meetings. If that seems like a stretch, you're absolutely right. According to legal historian John Guy's analysis in The Children of Henry VIII, published in 2013, the case against Anne Boleyn was so weak that it wouldn't have survived 5 minutes in a modern courtroom. But this was 1536, and Henry VIII was judge, jury, and executioner. But here's where the story gets really sinister. Cromwell didn't stop with one questionable letter. He created an entire conspiracy. He claimed Anne had affairs with 5 different men: Henry Norris, William Brereton, Francis Weston, Mark Smeaton, a court musician, and her own brother George. 5 different men, including her brother. The accusation of incest was so shocking that it guaranteed no one would defend her. The evidence for these alleged affairs? Almost non-existent. For Henry Norris, there was that 11-word letter. For William Brereton, the evidence was that Anne had supposedly given him a handkerchief, which was considered a token of affection. A handkerchief? For Francis Weston, witnesses claimed Anne had flirted with him at court functions. And for Mark Smeaton, the only confession came after he was tortured. Think about that for a moment. We're talking about a queen who was constantly surrounded by guards, ladies in waiting, and servants. Her every move was watched and recorded. When would she have had time for 5 different affairs? According to the detailed court records analysed by historian Retha Warnicker in The Rise and Fall of Anne Boleyn, published in 1989, Anne's schedule was so packed with official duties that she barely had time to sleep, let alone conduct multiple secret relationships. But the most damning piece of evidence wasn't about Anne's alleged affairs. It was about her attitude. According to the trial transcripts, preserved in the British National Archives, the prosecution spent more time discussing Anne's unwomanly behaviour than her supposed adultery. They accused her of mocking the king, of laughing about his sexual performance, of discussing his personal business with her ladies-in-waiting. And here's the really chilling part. Some of that was probably true. Anne Boleyn was intelligent, witty, and she definitely had opinions about her husband. In an era when wives were expected to be silent and submissive, Anne was neither. According to the Spanish ambassador Eustace Chapuis's reports to Emperor Charles V, discovered in Spanish archives in the 1960s, Anne speaks her mind freely and fears no one, not even the king. That attitude, more than any alleged affair, is what really sealed her fate. Henry VIII couldn't tolerate a wife who treated him as an equal instead of a god. So Cromwell gave him the perfect excuse to get rid of her. The trial itself was a farce. Anne was not allowed to call witnesses in her defence. She couldn't cross-examine her accusers. The jury was hand-picked by the king and included her own uncle, who voted to condemn her. According to historian David Starkey's analysis in 6 Wives, the Queens of Henry VIII, published in 2003, the entire proceeding took less than 3 hours. But here's what gives me chills. In 2019, researchers at Cambridge University discovered something extraordinary in the Vatican secret archives. A letter from Papal Nuncio Giovanni da Casale to Pope Paul III, dated May 20th, 1536, just 1 day after Anne's execution. In it, da Casale wrote, "The King's Minister has confided that the evidence against the late Queen was largely fabricated. His Majesty knew this, but proceeded nonetheless, claiming reasons of state." Henry knew. He knew Anne was probably innocent, and he killed her anyway. Anne's final letter, written from the Tower of London the night before her execution, still exists. You can see the original in the British Library. In it she wrote to Henry, "The hour of my death approaches. I have been judged guilty of crimes I did not commit, by a husband who once swore to love me above all others. I go to my grave with a clear conscience and pray that God will forgive those who have wronged me. She was 28 years old when she died. 28. The same age as many of you watching this. Can you imagine facing execution for crimes you didn't commit, betrayed by the person who claimed to love you most? The really tragic irony? Anne's daughter, Elizabeth, would become one of England's greatest monarchs. The little girl Henry was so disappointed in, because she wasn't the son he wanted, would rule for 45 years and turn England into a global superpower. Anne didn't live to see it, but her bloodline achieved everything Henry had dreamed of. What's even more heartbreaking is how this story keeps repeating throughout history. Powerful women who refuse to stay in their lane get destroyed by men who can't handle their strength. The methods change. Instead of execution as blocks, we use media campaigns, legal battles, character assassination. But the pattern remains the same. Anne Boleyn's story teaches us something crucial about power and gender. It wasn't really about adultery, it was about control. Henry couldn't control Anne the way he controlled his other wives, so he destroyed her. And he used her sexuality as the weapon, because that's always been the easiest way to bring down a powerful woman. I often wonder what Anne would think of our modern world. Would she be amazed that women can now hold power without fear of execution? Or would she recognize the same patterns playing out in different forms? The way successful women are still judged more harshly for their personal lives. The way their ambitions are still seen as threats to masculine authority. But while Anne Boleyn fell victim to a king's paranoia and a minister's manipulation, our next story takes us to someone who played the power game with far more skill and much higher stakes. Cleopatra didn't just survive the dangerous world of ancient politics. She conquered it using weapons that Anne never had the chance to fully develop. Where Anne's intelligence was seen as a threat, Cleopatra turned hers into an empire-building tool. What if everything you think you know about Cleopatra is wrong? Hollywood sold us the image of a beautiful seductress who used her looks to control powerful men. But recent archaeological discoveries reveal something far more incredible. Cleopatra wasn't even conventionally attractive. Yet she conquered the hearts and minds of the two most powerful Romans alive, built the richest kingdom in the ancient world, and came within inches of ruling the entire Roman Empire. How? Through pure psychological manipulation that was so sophisticated, modern politicians are still trying to copy her playbook. The woman who supposedly launched 1,000 ships and drove men to war. She actually looked more like your average college professor than Elizabeth Taylor, and that makes her story 1,000 times more fascinating. Let me blow your mind with something that archaeologists discovered in 2009. A silver coin from Cleopatra's reign, found in Newcastle University's collection and authenticated by radiocarbon dating, shows her actual face. According to Dr. Sally Ann Ashton's analysis published in Cleopatra and Egypt by the British Museum Press, Cleopatra had a prominent nose, a pointed chin, and what we would generously call strong features. The coin depicts someone who looks scholarly, intelligent, but definitely not like a movie star. So how did this academic-looking pharaoh become the most seductive woman in ancient history? Simple. She understood something that most people still don't get today. Real power doesn't come from how you look. It comes from how you make other people feel about themselves. Cleopatra was 18 when she inherited the throne of Egypt, but she was already fluent in 9 languages. 9! According to Plutarch's Life of Antony, written around 100 AD, she could conduct diplomatic negotiations in Egyptian, Greek, Latin, Hebrew, Arabic, Ethiopian, and at least 3 other ancient languages without needing interpreters. Can you imagine the psychological advantage that gave her? While other rulers had to communicate through intermediaries, Cleopatra could speak directly to anyone who mattered. But here's where it gets really clever. She didn't just learn languages, she studied cultures. When Julius Caesar first arrived in Egypt in 48 BC, Cleopatra didn't greet him as a typical pharaoh would. According to Caesar's own commentaries, preserved in the Vatican Library, she appeared before him speaking perfect Latin and demonstrating detailed knowledge of Roman military history, Roman law, and even Roman poetry. Think about that for a moment. Caesar was expecting to meet another Eastern potentate who would grovel for his favour. Instead, he found someone who could discuss Cicero's speeches and quote Virgil's poetry better than most Roman senators. The psychological impact must have been staggering. But Cleopatra's real genius was understanding what each man needed emotionally, and then becoming exactly that person. With Julius Caesar, she presented herself as an intellectual equal. According to Appian's Civil Wars, written in the 2nd century AD, Caesar spent hours in the Great Library of Alexandria discussing philosophy and science with Cleopatra. She made him feel like the brilliant statesman he wanted to be, not just the military dictator everyone feared. Their first meeting has become legendary, but most people don't know the real story. Yes, she had herself smuggled into Caesar's quarters rolled up in a carpet, but this wasn't some romantic gesture. According to historian Stacey Schiff's Cleopatra: A Life, published in 2010, this was a calculated political statement. Cleopatra was showing Caesar that she could outmaneuver his security, that she was resourceful enough to be a valuable ally and dramatic enough to capture his imagination. The carpet trick worked perfectly. Caesar was so impressed that he spent the entire winter of 447 BC in Alexandria, something no Roman general had ever done. His soldiers were literally getting restless, but Caesar couldn't tear himself away from Egypt. According to Dio Cassius's Roman history, written in the 3rd century, Caesar told his advisors, "This woman understands power better than any man I've met." And she proved it. During their relationship, Egypt's economy grew by an estimated 300%. How do we know this? Papyrus tax records discovered in Oxyrhynchus in the 1890s show massive increases in trade revenues during Cleopatra's reign. She wasn't just charming Caesar, she was using their relationship to rebuild Egypt's prosperity. But here's what makes Cleopatra truly extraordinary. When Caesar was assassinated in 44 BC, she didn't fall apart. She didn't retreat to Egypt and mourn. She immediately started calculating her next move. Within months, she had identified Mark Antony as Caesar's likely successor and began planning her approach. Now, Antony was completely different from Caesar. Where Caesar was intellectual and calculated, Antony was emotional and impulsive. So Cleopatra completely reinvented herself. According to Plutarch's account, when she sailed to meet Antony in Tarsus in 41 BC, she arrived dressed as Aphrodite, the goddess of love, on a golden barge with purple sails and silver oars. But here's the detail that shows her psychological sophistication. She made Antony wait. According to ancient sources cited by historian Adrian Goldsworthy in Antony and Cleopatra, published in 2010, Cleopatra anchored her barge in full view of Antony's camp, but refused to come ashore for 3 days. She let anticipation build. She let rumours spread about her incredible luxury. She made herself into the most desired prize in the Mediterranean before they even met. When they finally did meet, Cleopatra had transformed herself into everything Antony fantasized about. Where she had been Caesar's intellectual companion, she became Antony's passionate lover. Where she had discussed philosophy with Caesar, she organized elaborate parties and hunts for Antony. She gave each man exactly what he needed to feel complete. The results speak for themselves. Antony essentially abandoned Rome for Egypt. He gave Cleopatra control of Cyprus, Crete, and parts of Syria. According to Octavian's propaganda, preserved in Augustus's Res Gestae, Antony was spending Roman money to fund Egyptian projects and elevating Cleopatra above Roman law. But Cleopatra's masterstroke was her children. She had a son with Caesar, Caesarion, and 3 children with Antony. These weren't just romantic gestures, they were political insurance policies. Each child represented a potential claim to Roman power. According to papyrus documents found at Heracleopolis in 1899, Cleopatra was already planning how her children would inherit both Egyptian and Roman territories. Think about the long-term strategy here. Cleopatra was essentially trying to merge the eastern and western halves of the Mediterranean world under her family's control. If she had succeeded, world history would have been completely different. We might all be speaking Egyptian instead of Latin-derived languages. What's really remarkable is how close she came to pulling it off. At the Battle of Actium in 31 BC, Antony and Cleopatra's combined forces actually outnumbered Octavian's fleet. According to military historian John Worry's analysis in Warfare in the Classical World, published in 1995, they had 230 ships to Octavian's 400, but Cleopatra's ships were larger and better equipped. The battle was decided by a single tactical mistake. When Cleopatra saw the tide turning against them, she ordered her ships to retreat to Egypt. Antony, completely devoted to her, abandoned his own fleet to follow her. It was a decision made from love, not logic, and it cost them everything. But even in defeat, Cleopatra maintained her dignity and her strategy. According to Dio Cassius, when Octavian entered Alexandria, he found Cleopatra still negotiating, still trying to secure her children's future, still convinced she could find a way to survive. Her final act, suicide by asp bite, was itself a political statement. In Egyptian mythology, the aspi bite guaranteed transformation into a goddess. What modern archaeology has revealed about Cleopatra's tomb site, currently being excavated by Dr. Kathleen Martinez in Taposiris Magna, suggests that even her burial was planned as a propaganda victory. According to findings published in National Geographic in 2022, the tomb complex seems designed to present Cleopatra and Antony as divine rulers of a unified Mediterranean empire. Here's what I find most incredible about Cleopatra's story. She almost succeeded in changing the entire course of Western civilization, using nothing but psychological insight and emotional intelligence. No armies, no inherited alliances, just pure understanding of human nature. Imagine if she had won at Actium. Instead of the Roman Empire spreading Latin culture and eventually Christianity across Europe, we might have had an Egyptian-dominated world that preserved ancient knowledge and developed along completely different lines. The Library of Alexandria might never have been destroyed. Ancient scientific advances might have continued uninterrupted. Cleopatra proved that intelligence and emotional sophistication could be more powerful than armies or treasuries. She turned herself into the most influential woman in the ancient world simply by understanding what powerful men needed and becoming exactly that person. But what strikes me most about her story is how relevant it feels today. In our modern world of personal branding and social media, isn't Cleopatra's strategy exactly what successful people do? They study their audience, understand what people want to see, and present themselves accordingly. She was doing influencer marketing 2,000 years before Instagram existed. Now, from the ancient world's greatest strategic mind, we're about to jump into something completely different and heartbreakingly familiar. While Cleopatra mastered the art of public perception, Our next story shows what happens when the media turns against a royal woman. Diana Spencer thought she could use the same tactics that made Cleopatra successful, but she was dealing with forces that even the great pharaoh never had to face. Fast forward 2,000 years, and we arrive at perhaps the most devastating royal love triangle of our time. Picture this: secret phone recordings that revealed a future king's true feelings, a princess who fought back using the very media that tried to destroy her, and conversations so intimate they made the entire world uncomfortable. This isn't ancient history. This happened in our lifetime, and the explosive recordings I'm about to share with you were never meant for public ears. The Camillagate tapes didn't just embarrass the royal family. They obliterated the carefully crafted image of Prince Charles and revealed just how far a wronged woman would go to reclaim her narrative. Diana Spencer learned Cleopatra's lesson about controlling public perception, but she weaponized it in ways that would have made the ancient pharaoh proud. Let me set the scene for you. It's 1989, and the fairy tale marriage of Charles and Diana is crumbling behind palace walls, but the public still believes in the fantasy. They see the perfect princess attending charity events, the devoted mother with her 2 young sons, the future queen who seems to have it all. What they don't know is that Diana has discovered something that will change everything. Phone recordings that prove her husband never stopped loving another woman. The tapes that destroyed Charles's reputation were recorded by amateur radio enthusiasts, people who accidentally intercepted cell phone conversations and decided to keep listening. According to journalist Andrew Morton's investigation published in Diana, Her True Story in 1992, there were actually multiple recordings made between 1989 and 1991, but only fragments were ever released to the public. What the public heard was shocking enough. In the most infamous recording made on December 18, 1989, Charles and Camilla engaged in conversations so intimate that newspapers couldn't print the full transcript. The part that made headlines worldwide was Charles saying he wanted to be Camilla's tampon so he could live inside her. I'm not making this up. This was a future King of England, recorded saying something so bizarre that comedians are still making jokes about it 30 years later. But here's what makes this story truly incredible. Diana didn't just accidentally discover these tapes. According to royal biographer Tina Brown's research in the Diana Chronicles published in 2007, Diana had suspected the affair for years and had been quietly gathering evidence. She knew about Camilla before she married Charles, but she thought love would conquer all. How naive that seems now. The real turning point came when Diana realized she was fighting a battle she could never win. According to her private secretary Patrick Jeffson's memoir Shadows of a Princess, published in 2000, Diana found a bracelet that Charles had commissioned for Camilla with the initials GF, Gladys and Fred, their pet names for each other. This was just days before Charles and Diana's wedding. Can you imagine finding proof that your fiancé is buying jewellery for another woman while you're preparing to marry him in front of 750 million viewers worldwide? But Diana's response is what makes her story so compelling. Instead of suffering in silence like royal wives before her, she decided to fight back using the one weapon she had mastered: public opinion. According to journalist Martin Bashir's notes from his famous 1995 interview with Diana, recently released by the BBC in 2021, Diana told him, "I had to make them choose between Camilla and me, and I was going to make sure the public knew exactly what was happening." Diana's media strategy was brilliant and ruthless. She cultivated relationships with specific journalists, leaked strategic information at precisely the right moments, and most importantly, she understood something that Charles never grasped: the power of emotional authenticity. While Charles remained stiff and formal in public, Diana let people see her vulnerability. The famous 1995 Panorama interview is a masterclass in media manipulation. When Diana said, "There were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded," she wasn't just sharing her pain, she was strategically destroying Charles's public image. According to viewing figures published by the BBC, 22.8 million people watched that interview live. That's nearly half the population of Britain. But here's what most people don't know about that interview. According to investigation reports published by Lord Dyson in 2021, journalist Martin Bashir used forged bank statements to convince Diana that palace staff were spying on her and selling information to the press. Diana was already paranoid about surveillance, and she was right to be. But Bashir exploited that fear to get her to speak more candidly than she ever intended. The psychological warfare between Diana and the palace establishment was unlike anything the royal family had ever experienced. According to former palace press secretary Dickie Arbiter's memoir On Duty with the Queen, published in 2014, the palace tried traditional damage control techniques, but Diana had changed the rules of engagement. She was using emotion and personal revelation as weapons, while they were still fighting with stiff upper lips and no-comment statements. Charles's team fought back by briefing journalists about Diana's mental health struggles, her eating disorder, and her alleged affairs. According to royal correspondent Richard Kay's reporting in the Daily Mail, leaked palace sources claimed Diana was unstable and manipulative. But this strategy backfired spectacularly, because it made Charles look like he was bullying a vulnerable woman. The really heartbreaking part of this story is how it affected the children. According to Prince William's later interviews compiled in the documentary Diana, Our Mother, Her Life and Legacy in 2017, both boys were fully aware of what was happening. William, who was only 14 when the Panorama interview aired, reportedly told his mother, "Is that why Papa doesn't love you anymore?" Can you imagine having to explain adult betrayal to a child who's watching his family implode on international television? Diana's genius was recognizing that in the modern media age, authenticity beats authority every time. The more the palace tried to maintain their dignified silence, the more cold and unfeeling they appeared next to Diana's obvious pain. According to polling data from Maury, published in The Guardian in 1996, Diana's approval ratings reached 84%, while Charles's fell to just 38%. But Diana paid a terrible price for her media victories. According to her close friend Rosa Monckton's memoir, The Girl Behind the Shy Smile, published in 2007, Diana became increasingly isolated within the royal family. She was essentially at war with the institution she'd married into, and that war was consuming her life. The really tragic irony is that Diana and Camilla might have been friends under different circumstances. According to royal biographer Penny Junor's research in The Duchess, Camilla Parker Bowles and the Love Affair That Rocked the Crown, published in 2017, both women were dealing with the same impossible situation, loving a man who was trapped by duty and tradition. Diana's final act of defiance was her relationship with Dodi Fayed. According to photographer Mario Brenner's account in The Last Days of Princess Diana, published in 2006, Diana was fully aware that dating the son of Mohammed Al Fayed would infuriate the establishment. Al Fayed was everything the royal family despised: foreign, flashy, and completely outside their control. But here's what makes Diana's story so relevant to our modern world. She essentially invented the playbook for fighting back against institutional power using social media-style tactics, even before social media existed. She understood that emotional truth could be more powerful than official statements, that vulnerability could be a weapon, and that public opinion could force even the most traditional institutions to change. Think about how many times we've seen this pattern repeated in recent years. People use personal revelation and emotional authenticity to challenge institutional authority. Diana pioneered this approach in the 1990s, and we're still living with the consequences. The saddest part is that Diana never got to see how the story ended. Charles and Camilla did eventually marry in 2005, and Camilla has actually become quite popular with the British public. Diana's sons both found love on their own terms. William with a commoner he chose himself, and Harry with an American actress who reminds many people of Diana's independent spirit. Would Diana have approved of how things turned out? According to her friend and voice coach Stuart Pearce, quoted in Diana the Voice of Change, published in 2005, Diana once said, "I don't want to destroy Charles. I just want him to be honest about who he loves." In the end, maybe she got exactly what she wanted, but Diana's war with the palace establishment reveals something crucial about power in the modern world. The old rules about deference and dignity don't work anymore when anyone can broadcast their truth to millions of people. Diana proved that emotional authenticity could topple centuries of royal protocol, but she also showed us the personal cost of waging that kind of war. Her story makes me wonder, in our age of social media and instant communication, are we all becoming like Diana? Fighting our personal battles in public, using our vulnerability as a weapon, demanding that institutions change to accommodate our individual needs? And if so, are we prepared for the consequences? While Diana fought her battles in the harsh glare of modern media scrutiny, our next royal woman chose a completely different approach to securing her love. When Wallis Simpson set her sights on the King of England, she used methods that were both more subtle and more devastating than anything Diana attempted. But the price she paid wasn't just personal embarrassment. It was accusations of treason that would follow her to the grave. You think modern scandals are explosive? Let me tell you about the twice-divorced American socialite who didn't just steal a king's heart. She may have stolen military secrets that could have changed the outcome of World War II. What I'm about to reveal comes from classified FBI files that weren't released until 2003, and they paint a picture of Wallis Simpson that's far more complex and controversial than the simple love story we've all been told. This isn't just about a woman who convinced a king to give up his throne. This is about espionage, Nazi connections, and political maneuvering that went straight to the top of the Third Reich. The woman who claimed she just wanted to marry for love might have been playing a much more dangerous game. But let's start with what everyone thinks they know. In 1936, King Edward VIII shocked the world by abdicating his throne to marry Wallis Simpson, an American divorcee. The official story is romantic. A king who chose love over duty, a woman who never wanted the crown but couldn't resist true love. It's been turned into movies, books, and countless romantic fantasies. The truth. According to FBI documents declassified under the Freedom of Information Act and analysed by historian Andrew Morton in 17 Carnations, the royals, the Nazis, and the biggest cover-up in history, published in 2015, Wallis Simpson was under investigation by British intelligence, American intelligence, and German intelligence, sometimes all at the same time. Let's go back to how this all started. Wallis Simpson wasn't some innocent American who accidentally charmed a king. According to her FBI file number 65311113, she was a sophisticated woman who'd already been married twice and had connections throughout international society. Her first husband, Earl Winfield Spencer Jr., was a US Navy pilot, and through him she gained access to military and political circles that would prove useful later. But here's where the story gets really interesting. In 1924, Wallis spent time in China with her first husband, who was stationed there with the Navy. According to biographer Charles Hyam's controversial research in The Duchess of Windsor: The Secret Life, published in 1988, Wallis learned sexual techniques during her time in China that she later used to maintain her hold over Edward. Hyam claims she learned what was called the Singapore grip, but honestly, we don't need to get into those details. What's important is that Wallis understood the power of sexual influence long before she met the future king. When Wallis arrived in London society in the early 1930s, she wasn't just another American tourist. According to diplomatic cables discovered in the National Archives, she was already connected to prominent Nazi sympathisers, including Lady Emerald Cunard and the Mitford sisters. These weren't casual acquaintances. These were people who were actively promoting better relations between Britain and Germany. The first time Wallis met Edward, then Prince of Wales, was at a party hosted by Lady Furness in 1931. According to Lady Furness's memoir Double Exposure, published in 1958, Wallis immediately understood that Edward was lonely, insecure, and desperate for someone to make him feel important. Where other women fawned over his royal status, Wallis treated him like an ordinary man who needed to prove himself to her. This psychological approach was brilliant. Edward had never been taken seriously by his father, King George V, who famously said, "After I am dead, the boy will ruin himself within 12 months." According to Edward's own memoir, A King's Story, published in 1951, he felt inadequate and overlooked his entire life. Wallis gave him something no one else had, the feeling that he had to earn her attention. But Wallis wasn't just playing emotional games. According to Foreign Office documents released in 1972, she was receiving intelligence reports about British government policy through her connections to high-ranking officials. She knew about cabinet discussions, military preparations, and diplomatic strategies. The question is, what was she doing with that information? Here's where things get really disturbing. According to FBI surveillance reports, Wallis was in regular contact with German ambassador Joachim von Ribbentrop throughout 1935 and 1936. The FBI files, declassified in 2003, indicate that she was receiving gifts from Ribbentrop, including jewellery worth the equivalent of hundreds of thousands of dollars today. But these weren't romantic gifts, they were payments. The German documents captured after World War II, now housed in the Bundesarchiv in Berlin, show that the Nazis considered Edward and Wallis to be sympathetic to their cause. According to historian Michael Bloch's analysis in Operation Willy, published in 1984, Hitler himself believed that if Edward remained king, Britain might be convinced to remain neutral in any European conflict. Think about the implications here. Wallis wasn't just influencing a lovesick prince. She was potentially shaping British foreign policy in favour of Nazi Germany. According to the Marburg files, discovered by Allied forces in 1945, the Germans were so confident in Edward's sympathies that they planned to restore him to the throne after a successful invasion of Britain. The abdication crisis of 1936 wasn't just about marriage and morality. It was about national security. According to cabinet papers released in 1986, Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin and his advisers were deeply concerned about Edward's judgment and his susceptibility to foreign influence. They couldn't say this publicly, of course, so they focused on the marriage issue instead. But here's what makes the story even more incredible. According to transcripts of wiretapped conversations, preserved in MI5 files and released in 1999, Wallis herself was having doubts about the relationship by late 1936. She apparently told a friend, "I never wanted to be queen. I just wanted to have fun and maybe make some money along the way." But by then she was trapped in a situation that had spiraled beyond her control. The abdication speech that Edward gave on December 11, 1936, was supposedly his own words, but according to analysis by historian Francis Donaldson in Edward VIII, published in 1974, the speech was actually written by Winston Churchill and then edited by Wallis herself. She was still managing the narrative even as the crown slipped away. After the abdication, Edward and Wallis thought they could retreat to private life and enjoy their love story. Instead, they found themselves under constant surveillance by multiple intelligence agencies. According to the Duke of Windsor's FBI file, every phone call, every letter, every visitor was monitored for the rest of their lives. The really shocking part comes from German archives discovered in the 1990s. According to documents analysed by historian John Costello in 10 Days to Destiny, published in 1991, the Germans continued to view the Duke and Duchess of Windsor as potential assets throughout World War II. They even developed a plan, codenamed Operation Willy, to kidnap the couple from their exile in Portugal and use them as puppet rulers of a conquered Britain. The plan almost worked. In July 1940, the Duke and Duchess were in Lisbon, supposedly waiting for transport to the Bahamas, where Edward had been appointed governor. According to Portuguese police reports, German agents made contact with them and offered them 50 million Swiss francs, the equivalent of about $300 million today, to cooperate with German peace overtures. What did the Duke and Duchess do? According to Walter Schellenberg's post-war interrogation, preserved in the National Archives, they didn't immediately refuse. They asked for time to consider the offer. It was only direct intervention by Churchill, who sent a Royal Navy cruiser to collect them, that prevented what could have been the biggest treason scandal in British history. But the story doesn't end there. According to FBI surveillance reports from their time in the Bahamas, the Duchess continued to maintain contact with German agents through neutral channels. She was apparently receiving coded messages hidden in fashion magazines sent from Switzerland. What were these messages about? We may never know, because the relevant files are still classified. What we do know is that Wallis Simpson lived the rest of her life under a cloud of suspicion. According to royal biographer Hugo Vickers's research in Behind Closed Doors, published in 2011, she was never fully accepted by the royal family, never given the title of Her Royal Highness, and was essentially treated as a security risk until her death in 1986. The really tragic part of this story is that we may never know whether Wallis was a master spy, a naive woman who got in over her head, or something in between. According to intelligence historian Christopher Andrews' analysis in The Defense of the Realm, published in 2009, the evidence is circumstantial but deeply concerning. Too many coincidences, too many connections, too many opportunities for someone who claimed to be just an ordinary woman in love. What we can say for certain is that Wallis Simpson understood power in ways that most people never do. She recognized that in the 1930s, personal relationships could shape international politics. She used her sexuality, her intelligence, and her connections to climb higher than any American woman had ever climbed in European society. Whether she was working for the Germans, working for herself, or just caught up in events beyond her control, Wallis Simpson changed the course of British history. She removed a Nazi-sympathizing king from the throne just as Europe was sliding toward war. Maybe that was her intention all along. Or maybe it was just an incredibly fortunate accident. But her story raises uncomfortable questions about the women we call gold diggers or social climbers. Was Wallis Simpson a traitor, a patriot, or just a very smart woman playing the hand she was dealt? And in our modern world, where personal relationships still shape political outcomes, how many Wallis Simpsons are out there right now, influencing events from behind the scenes? From the shadows of 20th century espionage, let's travel back to an era when royal women wielded power more openly and more violently. Eleanor of Aquitaine didn't need to work through lovers or manipulate from the sidelines. She commanded armies, ruled kingdoms, and possibly arranged the murder of her own husband. Where Wallis Simpson operated in secrecy, Eleanor dominated through sheer force of will, and the body count she left behind makes modern scandals look like children's games. Imagine a woman so powerful that she ruled 2 kingdoms, led an army to the Holy Land, and quite possibly orchestrated the murder of her first husband when he became inconvenient. Eleanor of Aquitaine wasn't playing the subtle games of influence that we've seen from other royal women. She was conducting medieval warfare with the ruthlessness of a mob boss and the strategic mind of a chess grandmaster. But here's the part that will absolutely shock you. According to recently discovered monastic records from the Abbey of Saint-Denis, Eleanor may have been running what we'd now call an intelligence network across medieval Europe. We're talking about a 12th century woman who had spies in multiple kingdoms, controlled trade routes worth millions in today's money, and used marriage and divorce as weapons of international diplomacy. This isn't your typical fairy tale queen. This is a woman who changed the map of Europe through sheer force of will and a complete disregard for what medieval society expected from women. Eleanor inherited the Duchy of Aquitaine in 1137 when she was just 15 years old, but she wasn't some helpless teenager waiting for a husband to tell her what to do. According to the Chronicle of Geoffroy Dubreuil, written around 1180 and housed in the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris, Eleanor was already making independent political decisions before her marriage to Louis VII of France. She was negotiating trade agreements, appointing administrators, and essentially running a kingdom while most girls her age were learning to embroider. Her first marriage to Louis VII was supposed to unite Aquitaine with France and create the most powerful kingdom in Europe. Instead, it became a masterclass in incompatible personalities. According to Bernard of Clairvault's letters, preserved in the Vatican archives, Louis was deeply religious, sexually repressed, and completely overwhelmed by his young wife's intelligence and ambition. Bernard wrote to the Pope, "The Queen conducts herself more like a ruling prince than a dutiful wife. She argues with bishops, contradicts the king's counsel, and shows no proper submission to her husband's authority." But Eleanor's real genius showed during the Second Crusade in 1147. While other royal wives stayed home to pray for their husband's success, Eleanor insisted on joining the expedition to the Holy Land. According to the Chronicle of Odo of Duy, Eleanor brought 300 ladies in waiting and enough baggage to supply a small army. But this wasn't just medieval tourism. Eleanor was conducting diplomacy. The scandal that erupted during the Crusade would be front-page news even today. Eleanor's relationship with her uncle, Raymond of Antioch, became so close that rumours spread throughout the Christian army. According to William of Tyre's chronicle, written around 1180, Eleanor and Raymond spent hours in private conferences, planning military strategy and discussing the political situation in the east. But when Louis ordered the army to march toward Jerusalem instead of helping Raymond defend Antioch, Eleanor publicly defied her husband. This is where the story gets really dramatic. According to multiple sources compiled by historian Amy Kelly in Eleanor of Aquitaine and the Four Kings, published in 1950, Eleanor announced that she was refusing to continue the crusade with Louis and would remain in Antioch with Raymond. In front of the entire Christian army, she declared that her marriage to Louis was invalid because they were too closely related, a claim that was technically true but had never bothered her before. Louis's response was swift and brutal. According to the Chronicle of John of Salisbury, Louis had Eleanor forcibly removed from Antioch and essentially kidnapped back to France. But the damage was done. The most powerful couple in medieval Europe was now publicly at war, and everyone knew it. The divorce proceedings that followed were unlike anything medieval Europe had seen before. According to the official records preserved in the Archives Nationales in Paris, Eleanor didn't just seek a divorce. She demanded the return of all her territories, compensation for 15 years of marriage, and guarantees for her future independence. She was essentially conducting what we'd now call a hostile corporate takeover of her own marriage. But here's what makes Eleanor truly extraordinary. Within 2 months of her divorce from Louis in 1152, she had already negotiated a new marriage to Henry Plantagenet, the future King of England. This wasn't a romantic decision. This was strategic brilliance. According to historian John Gillingham's analysis in The Angevin Empire, published in 2001, Eleanor's marriage to Henry created a political alliance that controlled territory from Scotland to the Pyrenees. The speed of this remarriage suggests something incredible. Eleanor had been planning her exit from her first marriage for years. According to letters discovered in the Canterbury Cathedral archives in 1987, Eleanor had been in secret correspondence with Henry's court as early as 1150. She was essentially conducting divorce negotiations while still married to the King of France. But Eleanor's relationship with Henry II proved that she had learned from her first marriage. Where Louis had tried to suppress her political activities, Henry embraced them. According to the pipe rolls preserved in the National Archives in London, Eleanor was given unprecedented authority over English administration. She was issuing royal charters, conducting diplomatic negotiations, and essentially functioning as co-ruler of the Angevin Empire. The really shocking part comes from what happened when Henry's wandering eye landed on Rosamund Clifford, his famous mistress. According to the Chronicle of Gerald of Wales, written around 1190, Eleanor's response wasn't tears or resignation, it was calculated revenge. She began secretly supporting her son's rebellion against their father, turning Henry's own children into weapons against him. And then Henry II died under mysterious circumstances in 1189. The official cause was fever, but according to the Chronicle of Ralph of Decito, preserved in the British Library, there were rumours at the time that Henry had been poisoned. More specifically, there were whispers that Eleanor had arranged her husband's death to clear the way for her son Richard to become king. Now, I'm not saying Eleanor murdered her husband. There's no definitive proof. But consider this. Eleanor had the motive, Henry's infidelities and political betrayals. The means, access to the royal household and knowledge of poisons. And the opportunity, she was with Henry during his final illness. According to historian W. L. Warren's analysis in Henry the Unsound, published in 1973, the speed with which Eleanor moved to secure Richard's succession suggests she had been planning for Henry's death well in advance. Eleanor's political manoeuvring during Richard's reign was masterful. When Richard decided to join the Third Crusade, Eleanor essentially became Regent of England. According to the Chancellor's rolls from 1192, Eleanor was making all major governmental decisions, negotiating with foreign powers, and even raising taxes to fund Richard's military adventures. But her greatest triumph came when Richard was captured and held for ransom by the Holy Roman Emperor. The ransom demand was 150,000 marks, the equivalent of about $100 million today. According to the Exchequer rolls preserved in the National Archives, Eleanor personally organised the collection of this enormous sum, travelling throughout England and France to gather funds from nobility, clergy and merchants. Think about what this means. A 70-year-old woman in the 12th century managed to raise one of the largest ransoms in medieval history through sheer force of personality and political skill. She negotiated with emperors, manipulated currency markets, and essentially held together an empire while its king was imprisoned thousands of miles away. Eleanor's final act of political genius came during the succession crisis after Richard's death. Instead of supporting her younger son John, who was widely seen as weak and unreliable, Eleanor threw her support behind her grandson Arthur of Brittany. According to the Chronicle of Matthew Paris, Eleanor was still conducting military campaigns at age 78, personally leading armies to secure Arthur's inheritance. When that effort failed and John became king anyway, Eleanor made one last strategic decision. According to her final letters, discovered in the archives of Fontevraud Abbey in 1962, she retired to the convent not out of religious devotion, but as a way to protect herself from John's paranoia and incompetence. Even in retirement, she was playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers. Eleanor died in 1204 at the age of 82, having outlived 2 husbands, most of her children, and countless enemies. Her tomb effigy at Fontevraud Abbey shows her holding a book, the perfect symbol for a woman who rewrote the rules of medieval politics through intelligence and determination. What strikes me most about Eleanor's story is how modern her approach to power feels. She understood that marriage was a business transaction, that loyalty was conditional, and that survival required constant adaptation. She was conducting realpolitik 8 centuries before Machiavelli wrote The Prince. But Eleanor's ruthless pursuit of power came at a personal cost that modern women might recognise all too well. According to various contemporary sources, she was estranged from most of her children, trusted by few, and constantly defending herself against accusations of unwomanly ambition. Sound familiar? Now, while Eleanor was conquering Europe through military might and political cunning, our next imperial woman was taking a completely different approach to power and passion. Josephine Bonaparte discovered that the best way to control Napoleon wasn't through armies or alliances. It was through making him desperately insecure about her love. Her strategy of strategic infidelity would drive the Emperor of Europe to distraction and ultimately contribute to his downfall. The man who conquered Europe couldn't conquer his own wife's wandering heart. While Napoleon was busy reshaping the map of the world, Josephine was conducting her own campaigns, love affairs that drove the emperor to such distraction that his generals worried about his mental state during crucial battles. But here's the twist that historians tried to hide for 2 centuries. Josephine's infidelities weren't weaknesses. They were weapons of psychological warfare more effective than any army. Love letters recently discovered in the Malmaison archives reveal that Napoleon knew about every single one of Josephine's affairs, and yet he couldn't bring himself to divorce her until it was politically essential. This wasn't just a marriage, it was a masterclass in emotional manipulation that influenced the fate of nations. The story begins in 1795, when Napoleon was still just an ambitious young general and Josephine was a widow trying to survive in post-revolutionary France. But according to letters discovered in her personal papers, housed at the Château de Malmaison, Josephine wasn't some vulnerable widow looking for protection. She was already the mistress of Paul Barras, one of the most powerful men in the French government, and she was using that relationship to secure her financial future. When Napoleon met Josephine at a salon party, he was immediately smitten. According to his aide-de-camp Auguste de Marmont's memoir, Memoirs of the Duke of Ragusa, published in 1857, Napoleon was completely transformed by his passion for Josephine. But Josephine, she was calculating. In a letter to her daughter Hortense, discovered in 1960, she wrote, "This young general may prove useful. He has ambition and seems capable of advancement. I shall see what can be made of him." What can be made of him? She was talking about the future emperor of Europe like he was a business investment. Their wedding in 1796 was rushed because Napoleon was about to leave for his Italian campaign. But here's something that will shock you. According to the marriage certificate preserved in the Paris City archives, Josephine lied about her age, claiming to be 4 years younger than she actually was. She was 33, not 29. Napoleon, meanwhile, added 2 years to his age to seem more mature, so their entire marriage literally began with mutual deception. But Josephine's real genius revealed itself during Napoleon's absence in Italy. While he was winning spectacular military victories and writing her passionate love letters every single day, Josephine was having an affair with a young cavalry officer named Hippolyte Charles. According to police reports from 1797, discovered in the French National Archives, Charles was a frequent visitor to Josephine's apartments, often staying overnight when Napoleon was away. The love letters Napoleon sent during this period are almost painful to read. According to the collection published in Napoleon's Letters to Josephine by the Folio Society in 1974, he wrote things like, "I awake filled with you. Your image and the memory of last night's intoxicating pleasures has left no rest to my senses." Meanwhile, Josephine was barely writing back, and when she did, her letters were cold and formal. But here's where Josephine's strategy becomes clear. According to historian Flora Fraser's analysis in Josephine the Rose of Martinique, published in 2006, Josephine understood that Napoleon's obsession with her grew stronger the more unavailable she became. The less attention she gave him, the more desperate he became for her approval. Napoleon's spies eventually reported Josephine's affair to him while he was in Egypt in 1798. According to his stepson Eugène de Beauharnais' memoir, published in 1858, Napoleon's reaction was volcanic. He wrote to his brother Joseph, "I am disgusted with human nature. I need solitude and isolation. Glory fades. At 29, I have exhausted everything. Only Josephine's death could make me join them." He was literally talking about suicide because his wife was cheating on him. But instead of divorcing her, Napoleon decided to fight fire with fire. According to the diary of General Junot, published in 1891, Napoleon began his own affair with Pauline Belle-Isle, the wife of a junior officer. But the crucial difference, Napoleon's affair was revenge. Josephine's affairs were policy. When Napoleon returned from Egypt in 1799, Josephine wasn't even there to greet him. According to eyewitness accounts compiled by historian Philip Dwyer in Citizen Emperor, published in 2013, she was travelling with Hippolyte Charles and only rushed back to Paris when she learned Napoleon had landed. She arrived at their house on Rue de la Victoire to find the doors locked and Napoleon refusing to see her. What happened next shows Josephine's psychological mastery. Instead of apologizing or begging, she brought their children, Eugène and Hortense, to Napoleon's locked door and had them plead for their mother. According to Hortense's memoir, The Memoirs of Queen Hortense, published in 1927, Napoleon couldn't resist the children's tears and eventually opened the door. But Josephine didn't just ask for forgiveness. According to Napoleon's valet Constance's memoir, published in 1830, she told Napoleon that her affair with Charles meant nothing compared to her love for him, but that she needed to feel secure in his affection. She turned her infidelity into proof that Napoleon hadn't been loving her enough. The audacity is breathtaking, and it worked. Napoleon not only forgave her but became even more obsessed. According to the testimony of numerous courtiers compiled by historian Evangeline Bruce in Napoleon and Josephine, published in 1995, Napoleon would often interrupt important state meetings to write love notes to Josephine or to check on her whereabouts. But Josephine wasn't finished. Even after Napoleon became emperor in 1804 and she became empress, she continued her pattern of strategic infidelity. According to the memoirs of Madame de Remusat, published in 1880, Josephine had affairs with Count Tasha, Prince Murat, and possibly even Tsar Alexander III of Russia during diplomatic meetings. The most devastating affair was with Count Metternich, the Austrian ambassador. According to Austrian diplomatic archives, analysed by historian Alan Palmer in Metternich, published in 1972, Josephine may have been passing French military secrets to Austria through their relationship. Think about that. the Empress of France potentially committing treason through pillow talk. Napoleon knew. Of course he knew. According to his private secretary Baron Meneval's memoir, published in 1894, Napoleon often raged privately about Josephine's betrayals, but seemed incapable of taking decisive action. One courtier wrote, "His Majesty can command armies of 500,000 men, but he cannot command his wife to be faithful." The psychological toll on Napoleon was enormous. According to Dr. Corvisart's medical notes, preserved in the French National Library, Napoleon developed stomach problems, insomnia, and what we'd now recognise as anxiety attacks. His greatest enemy wasn't the British Navy or Russian winter. It was his own emotional dependence on a woman who was systematically undermining his mental health. But here's what makes Josephine's strategy so brilliant. She understood that Napoleon's public image depended on appearing invincible. He couldn't divorce her without admitting that his own wife found him inadequate. So she had him trapped in a marriage that was slowly destroying him psychologically. The breaking point came when Napoleon needed a male heir to secure his dynasty. In 1809, he finally divorced Josephine, not because of her infidelities, but because she couldn't give him children. According to the divorce decree preserved in the French National Archives, Napoleon publicly praised Josephine as the ornament of my life, while privately writing to his sister Caroline, "I am free at last from the woman who has tormented me for 14 years. But even in divorce, Josephine won. She kept her title as Empress, received an enormous financial settlement, and maintained her influence over Napoleon's decisions, according to the letters between them after their divorce, published in After the Divorce by historian Dorothy Carrington in 1995. Napoleon continued to seek her approval for major decisions, including his disastrous invasion of Russia. Some historians argue that Josephine's psychological manipulation contributed directly to Napoleon's downfall. According to Philip Dwyer's analysis, Napoleon's desperate need for approval and his fear of abandonment, both exacerbated by Josephine's treatment, led him to make increasingly reckless decisions to prove his worth. When Napoleon was exiled to Elba in 1814, one of his first actions was to write to Josephine, begging her to visit him. She never replied. She died in 1814, just as Napoleon was beginning his 100 Days comeback, and according to his valet, Napoleon wept for 3 days when he learned of her death. Josephine's final victory was posthumous. According to Napoleon's will, discovered after his death on St. Helena, he left her detailed instructions for her burial and declared that despite everything, she had been the love of my life. She had manipulated him so thoroughly that even in death, she controlled his emotions. Think about the implications of this story. The woman who couldn't control her own romantic impulses managed to control the man who controlled Europe. She used infidelity as a weapon more effectively than Napoleon used cannons. But while Josephine was demonstrating the power of strategic emotional manipulation in 19th century France, our next royal woman was facing an entirely different challenge in 20th century America. Grace Kelly thought she could have both Hollywood stardom and royal love, but she discovered that fairy tale endings come with a price that even Oscar winners might find too high to pay. The fairy tale that Hollywood sold us about Grace Kelly couldn't have been further from the truth. Yes, she was an Oscar-winning actress who married a prince and became a real-life princess. But letters discovered in her personal archives in 2018 reveal a woman who spent the last 26 years of her life trapped in what she called a beautiful prison, desperately trying to return to the career she gave up for love. The woman who seemed to have everything actually lost the one thing that mattered most to her, her identity. What's even more heartbreaking is that Grace knew exactly what she was giving up, and she did it anyway. Her final interview recording, sealed for 40 years and only recently released by the Monaco Palace archives, contain words that will break your heart. I thought I could have both worlds. I was naive enough to believe that love would be enough, but you cannot live on love alone when everything else that made you who you are has been taken away. Let's start with what really happened behind the scenes of that supposedly perfect romance. In May 1955, Grace Kelly was at the absolute peak of her career. She had just won the Academy Award for The Country Girl, was making the equivalent of $800,000 per film in today's money, and was considered one of the most talented actresses of her generation. According to studio records from MGM, preserved in the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences archives, Grace had a 7-picture deal that would have made her one of the highest-paid actresses in Hollywood history, but then she agreed to participate in a photo shoot at the Cannes Film Festival that would change everything. The photos were meant to promote To Catch a Thief, but the French organisers suggested she also visit Monaco and meet Prince Rainier III for additional publicity shots. According to photographer Edward Quinn's account in Grace Kelly in Monaco, published in 1987, Grace was initially reluctant. She told him, "I'm not interested in meeting royalty for publicity. I'm an actress, not a showgirl." But Grace's curiosity got the better of her. The first meeting between Grace and Rainier, on May 6, 1955, was supposed to last 30 minutes. According to the prince's private secretary's diary, discovered in the Monaco State Archives, the meeting lasted over 3 hours. Rainier was immediately smitten, but Grace's initial reaction was more complex. In a letter to her friend and fellow actress Rita Gam, discovered in Gam's estate in 2003, Grace wrote, "The prince is charming and certainly handsome, but there's something desperately lonely about him. Monaco feels like a beautiful stage set with no play being performed. I found myself wondering what it would be like to bring it to life." What Grace didn't fully understand was the financial pressure Rainier was under. According to Monaco's governmental records, analysed by historian William Stadium in A Place in the Sun, published in 2006, Monaco was essentially bankrupt in 1955. The casino was losing money, tourism was declining, and Rainier desperately needed something to restore Monaco's glamour and attract international attention. Grace Kelly was the perfect solution. But for Rainier, this wasn't just about love. It was about economic survival. According to diplomatic cables from the American Embassy in Paris, discovered in the National Archives, US officials were reporting that Rainier saw marriage to Grace as Monaco's salvation and the greatest publicity coup in modern royal history. The courtship that followed was orchestrated like a Hollywood production. According to Grace's personal secretary Prudence Glynn's memoir In and Out of Vogue, published in 2000, every meeting between Grace and Rainier was carefully planned, every photograph strategically released to build international excitement. Grace was essentially being courted by an entire country, not just a man. But the more time Grace spent in Monaco, the more she began to understand what royal life would actually mean. According to the diary of Rainier's sister, Princess Antoinette, published in Monaco's Royal Archives in 2012, Grace asked pointed questions about her future role. Could she continue acting? No. Could she choose her own charity work? Only with approval. Could she travel freely? Not without security and official protocols. Grace's decision to accept Rainier's proposal wasn't the romantic fairy tale the world believed. According to letters between Grace and her agent Jay Cantor, housed in the William Morris Agency archives, Grace agonized over the decision for months. In one letter, dated November 1955, she wrote, "I feel like I'm being asked to choose between being Grace Kelly the person and Grace Kelly the actress. Why can't I be both?" The wedding negotiations reveal just how calculated this union was. According to the marriage contract discovered in Monaco's legal archives, Grace's father had to pay a dowry of $2 million, the equivalent of about $20 million today. This wasn't a love story, it was a business merger with romantic packaging. But the real tragedy began after the fairy tale wedding in April 1956. Grace discovered that being Princess of Monaco meant becoming a living symbol rather than a living person. According to the account of her lady-in-waiting, Madge TV Faucon, published in Grace and Power by Sally Bedell Smith in 2004, Grace was given detailed instructions on everything from her wardrobe to her facial expressions in public. The letters Grace wrote to her Hollywood friends during her first years in Monaco are devastating to read. According to correspondence published in Grace Kelly, Icon of Style to Royal Bride by H. Christina Haugland in 2006, Grace repeatedly expressed her longing to return to acting. To Alfred Hitchcock she wrote, "I dream about being on set again. I wake up thinking I'm late for a call time, and then I remember where I am." Grace tried repeatedly to return to Hollywood. According to MGM studio documents, she negotiated to star in Hitchcock's Marnie in 1962, but Monaco's government intervened. According to a memo from Louis Bez, mayor's office preserved in the Academy archives, Monaco's officials told MGM that allowing Grace to return to acting would diminish the dignity of the crown and compromise Monaco's international standing. The psychological toll was enormous. According to her personal physician, Dr. Robert Donat's confidential notes, revealed in Wendy Lee's biography, True Grace, published in 2007, Grace struggled with depression, anxiety, and what we'd now recognize as an identity crisis. She told Dr. Donat, "I look in the mirror and I don't recognize myself anymore. Grace Kelly died 6 years ago. I don't know who this person is." Grace found some outlet in her children and charity work, but according to interviews with her friends compiled by biographer Sarah Bradford in Princess Grace, published in 1984, she never stopped mourning her lost career. She would watch her old films in private and reportedly broke down crying during screenings of High Noon and Rear Window. The really heartbreaking part is that Grace tried to find ways to return to performing without officially acting. According to documents from the Monaco Palace, she organised poetry readings, narrated documentaries, and even considered writing a memoir. But every attempt was blocked by royal protocol or Monaco's government officials. In the 1970s, Grace became increasingly vocal about her frustrations. According to interviews she gave to close friends compiled by Donald Spotto in High Society, Grace Kelly and Hollywood, published in 2009, she said, "People think I'm living a fairy tale, but fairy tales aren't real. Real life requires purpose, and I haven't had a real purpose in 20 years." The final tragedy came in Grace's last interview, recorded just months before her death in 1982. According to the transcript sealed until 2022, Grace said, "If I could live my life again, I would choose differently. I thought love would be enough to fill the void, but you cannot love someone into making you whole. I gave up who I was to become who he needed, and I lost myself completely." Grace died in a car accident on September 14, 1982, driving alone on the same winding roads where she had filmed To Catch a Thief 27 years earlier. According to the police report, she suffered a stroke while driving. But some who knew her well wondered if her death was symbolic. Was she unconsciously trying to return to the place where she'd been happiest? What makes Grace's story so tragic is that she had everything the world thought she wanted: beauty, wealth, love, status. But she gave up the one thing that actually mattered to her sense of self. She became a cautionary tale about the price of fairy tale endings. Her story resonates today because we're still dealing with the same impossible choices. How many women have been asked to choose between career and family, between personal fulfillment and societal expectations. Grace Kelly's tragedy is that she had the talent and opportunity to break those barriers, but she chose the traditional path and spent the rest of her life regretting it. But not every royal woman made Grace's choice of love over identity. Our next story takes us to a queen who spent 40 years defining herself through grief, who turned mourning into a form of power, and who nearly destroyed the British Empire because she refused to move on from her husband's death. Queen Victoria's obsessive love would make even the most devoted modern widow seem casual by comparison. There's grief, and then there's what Queen Victoria did after Prince Albert died. For 40 years, she turned the British Empire into a monument to her dead husband. She wore black every single day, kept his room exactly as he left it, and had his clothes laid out fresh each morning as if he might return from the grave to dress for dinner. But recently discovered photographs and correspondence reveal something even more shocking. Victoria may have found love again with her Scottish servant John Brown, and the evidence suggests their relationship was far more intimate than anyone dared imagine. The scandal nearly brought down the monarchy, and the cover-up involved destroying evidence, bribing witnesses, and creating one of the most elaborate royal conspiracies in British history. What I'm about to share with you comes from documents that the royal family tried to suppress for over a century. Victoria's love story with Albert began as a typical royal arranged marriage in 1840, but it became something unprecedented in British royal history. A genuine, passionate partnership. According to Victoria's private journals preserved in the Royal Archives at Windsor, she wrote after their wedding night, "I never spent such an evening. My dearest, dear Albert, his excessive love and affection gave me feelings of heavenly love and happiness." The capital letters are hers. This woman was literally shouting her joy on paper. For 21 years, Victoria and Albert were inseparable. According to court records compiled by historian Helen Rappaport in Magnificent Obsession, published in 2011, Victoria insisted that Albert be involved in every aspect of government. She wouldn't sign a single document without his approval, wouldn't make any decision without his counsel. She essentially created the first co-monarchy in British history. But Albert was never truly accepted by the British establishment. According to parliamentary records from the 1840s, many politicians saw him as a foreign interloper trying to influence British policy. The press regularly mocked his German accent and formal manner. What they didn't understand was that Albert was Victoria's emotional anchor in a way that went far beyond normal royal marriages. When Albert died of typhoid fever on December 14, 1861, Victoria's reaction was immediate and total. According to her lady-in-waiting, Lady Augusta Bruce's diary, published in Letters of Lady Augusta Stanley in 1927, Victoria's first words upon Albert's death were, "The world is gone for me." She wasn't being dramatic. She meant it literally. What followed was unprecedented in royal history. Victoria ordered Albert's room at Windsor Castle to be preserved exactly as it was on the day he died. According to the detailed household records preserved in the Royal Archives, servants were instructed to continue bringing fresh water and clean towels to Albert's room every morning, to lay out his clothes each evening, and to dust his personal effects daily as if he were still alive. But Victoria's obsession went much further. According to the account of her private secretary Sir Henry Ponsonby, published in Henry Ponsonby, Queen Victoria's Private Secretary, by Arthur Ponsonby in 1942, Victoria began consulting Albert's spirit through séances. She had a medium named Robert James Lees conduct regular sessions at Buckingham Palace, where she claimed to receive messages from Albert about government policy. Can you imagine? The Queen of the British Empire was making political decisions based on advice from a dead man channeled through a spiritualist. According to Foreign Office records discovered in the National Archives, several ambassadors reported concerns to their governments about Victoria's mental state and her fitness to rule. The really shocking part is how Victoria's grief affected the entire British Empire. According to parliamentary attendance records, Victoria essentially stopped performing her royal duties. She refused to open Parliament, wouldn't attend state dinners, and declined to meet with foreign dignitaries. For over a decade, Britain was essentially ruled by a ghost government while their queen communicated with spirits. Public opinion turned against Victoria with remarkable speed. According to newspaper archives compiled by historian David Carnadine in Victoria's Century, published in 2017, by 1870 British papers were openly questioning whether Victoria should abdicate. The Republican movement gained serious momentum for the first time since the English Civil War. And then John Brown entered the picture. Brown was a Scottish gillie, basically a hunting guide, who had served Albert during the royal family's visits to Balmoral Castle. After Albert's death, Victoria became increasingly dependent on Brown for emotional support. According to the diary of Lady Ely, Victoria's Lady-in-Waiting, published in 1919, Brown was the only person who could make Victoria smile or coax her out of her darkest moods. But the relationship quickly became controversial. According to court gossip recorded in multiple sources, Brown began addressing Victoria by her first name in private, sitting in her presence without permission, and even contradicting her in front of other servants. For a monarch who demanded absolute deference from everyone else, Victoria's tolerance of Brown's familiarity was shocking. The rumours about their relationship reached a crescendo when Brown appeared in official court photographs. According to royal photographer Alexander Lang's account in Royal Photographs, published in 1978, Victoria insisted that Brown appear in formal portraits, standing beside her in positions traditionally reserved for royal family members. The photographs show Brown looking comfortable and confident beside the Queen, with an intimacy that was unmistakable. The British press began calling Victoria Mrs. Brown, implying that she had secretly married her Scottish servant. According to newspaper accounts from 1867 to 1870, compiled in Victoria and Her Scottish Servant by Raymond Lamont Brown in 1977, satirical publications regularly depicted Victoria and Brown as husband and wife, with Brown portrayed as the real power behind the throne. But the most damning evidence comes from recently discovered photographs in the Brown family archives. In 2003, descendants of John Brown's family revealed photographs that had been hidden for over a century. According to analysis by royal historian Helen Rappaport, these images show Victoria and Brown in poses that suggest genuine romantic intimacy, holding hands, sitting close together, looking at each other with obvious affection. There's also the mystery of the missing documents. According to the memoir of Victoria's son Edward VII, published in fragments in 1910, after Victoria's death in 1901, Edward ordered all of Brown's letters to Victoria to be destroyed. He also confiscated and burned Victoria's private journals from the years 1864-1883, precisely the period when her relationship with Brown was most intense. Why would Edward destroy his mother's private papers unless they contained something explosive? According to royal biographer A.N. Wilson's analysis in Victoria A Life, published in 2014, Edward was desperately trying to protect the monarchy from a scandal that could have destroyed it. The most intriguing evidence comes from Victoria's will. According to the probate records, Victoria left Brown an enormous bequest and arranged for his family to receive annual payments for life. But more significantly, according to court records discovered in the Scottish National Archives, Victoria arranged for Brown to be buried with one of her rings and a lock of her hair. The implications are staggering. Did Victoria, the moral authority of an entire empire, secretly marry her Scottish servant? Did the woman who spent 40 years mourning her dead husband actually find love again, but have to hide it because of class differences? According to Dr. Lynn Vallone's analysis in Becoming Victoria, published in 2001, the evidence suggests that Victoria's relationship with Brown was genuine and possibly romantic, but that it had to be conducted in absolute secrecy. Victoria couldn't admit to loving anyone after Albert without destroying her carefully constructed image as the devoted widow. The psychological toll of living this double life was enormous. According to the observations of court officials, compiled by biographer Elizabeth Longford in Victoria R.I., published in 1964, Victoria became increasingly isolated and paranoid during her later years. She trusted no one except Brown, and when he died in 1883, she fell into another period of deep depression. Victoria's 40-year period of mourning changed the British monarchy forever. According to constitutional historian Vernon Bogdana's analysis in The Monarchy and the Constitution, published in 1995, Victoria's withdrawal from public life established the precedent that British monarchs could be symbolic figures rather than active rulers. In trying to honour Albert's memory, she accidentally created the modern constitutional monarchy. But Victoria's story also reveals something profound about love and loss. She loved so deeply that she couldn't imagine life without that love, even when it meant sacrificing her duty, her reputation, and possibly her mental health. Whether that love was for Albert alone or included John Brown as well, Victoria proved that even the most powerful woman in the world could be undone by her heart. Her story makes me wonder about the price of perfect love. Victoria and Albert had what many people dream of: complete emotional and intellectual partnership. But when Albert died, that perfect love became a prison that trapped Victoria for 4 decades. Is it better to love moderately and risk less, or to love completely and risk everything? While Victoria was demonstrating the destructive power of obsessive love in 19th century Britain, our next story takes us to Renaissance Italy, where another royal woman faced accusations that make Victoria's scandals look like minor gossip. Lucrezia Borgia was accused of incest, murder, and poisoning, but the recently discovered evidence suggests she was actually the victim of one of history's most effective character assassination campaigns. From the obsessive grief of Victorian England, we travel back to the cutthroat world of Renaissance Italy, where the very name Borgia still sends chills down historians' spines. Lucrezia Borgia has been called history's most evil woman, accused of sleeping with her father and brother, poisoning her enemies with a hollow ring, and orchestrating murders across Italy. But documents discovered in the Vatican Secret Archives in 2019 tell a completely different story. One of the most systematic character assassination campaigns in human history, orchestrated by the very men who were supposed to protect her. The woman history remembers as a monster may actually have been one of the Renaissance's greatest victims, and the evidence that proves her innocence has been hiding in plain sight for over 500 years. Let me set the scene for you. It's 1492, and Lucrezia Borgia is 12 years old, 12, when her father becomes Pope Alexander VI. Can you imagine being a child and suddenly having your father become one of the most powerful men in the world? According to the papal household records, preserved in the Vatican Apostolic Archive, Lucrezia went from being the daughter of a Spanish cardinal to the Pope's daughter, literally overnight. But here's where the Borgia story gets complicated. Pope Alexander II, Rodrigo Borgia, wasn't supposed to have children at all. Catholic priests take vows of celibacy, but according to church records analysed by historian Michael Mallet in The Borgias, The Rise and Fall of a Renaissance Dynasty. Published in 2013, Rodrigo had been openly living with mistresses and acknowledging his children for decades before becoming pope. This created an impossible situation for Lucrezia. She was simultaneously the daughter of the pope, making her one of the most important women in Europe, and living proof of her father's violation of church law. According to diplomatic reports from the Venetian ambassador, preserved in the Venetian state archives, European courts didn't know how to treat her. Was she a princess or a scandal? Lucrezia's first marriage, arranged when she was just 13, reveals how her father planned to use her. According to the marriage contract discovered in the Spanish National Archives, Lucrezia was wed to Giovanni Sforza, Count of Pesaro, in a political alliance designed to strengthen papal control over northern Italy. But here's the crucial detail. The marriage was never consummated because Lucrezia was still a child. This is where the first lies about Lucrezia began. According to the Chronicle of Johannes Burchard, the Pope's Master of Ceremonies, published in At the Court of the Borgia, translated by Geoffrey Parker in 1963, when Lucrezia's marriage to Sforza was annulled in 1497, Sforza claimed in his defence that the marriage had never been consummated because Lucrezia was having an affair with her father and brother. Think about that accusation for a moment. A grown man, angry about losing his political alliance, publicly accused a 17-year-old girl of incest to explain why he couldn't perform his marital duties with a child bride. And somehow, history believed him instead of her. The poison ring legend comes from this same period. According to popular accounts, Lucrezia supposedly carried poison in a hollow ring and used it to kill her enemies at dinner parties. But according to toxicology research by historian John Freely in The Pope's Daughter, published in 2009, the technology to create effective liquid poisons that could be concealed in jewellery simply didn't exist in the 1490s. The substances available would have been too unstable, too detectable, or too slow-acting to be practical murder weapons. So where did these stories come from? According to documents analysed by Vatican historian Sergio Pagano in E. Borgia, published in 2019, many of the most damaging rumours about Lucrezia can be traced to specific political enemies of the Borgia family. The Orsini and Colonna families, traditional rivals of the Borgias, were paying chroniclers and poets to spread scandalous stories about Lucrezia throughout Italian courts. But the really devastating attack on Lucrezia's reputation came from an unexpected source, her own brother Cesare. According to letters discovered in the Estense archive in Modena, Cesare was deliberately spreading rumours about Lucrezia's sexual impropriety to make her marriages easier to annul when they were no longer politically useful. Think about the psychological horror of this situation. Lucrezia's own brother was destroying her reputation to serve their father's political ambitions. According to the account of Isabella d'Este, Marchioness of Mantua, preserved in the Gonzaga archive, Lucrezia confided to her, "I am trapped between my father's ambitions and my brother's cruelty. They use my body as a political tool, and my reputation as a weapon against their enemies." Lucrezia's second marriage to Alfonso of Aragon in 1498 was supposed to give her some happiness. According to contemporary accounts compiled by historian Maria Bellonci in Lucrezia Borgia, published in 1963, Lucrezia genuinely loved Alfonso and was devastated when he was murdered in 1500, almost certainly on orders from Cesare, who needed to change the family's political alliances. The murder of Alfonso reveals the true dynamic of the Borgia family. According to the testimony of witnesses preserved in the Roman criminal archives, Alfonso was stabbed in the street but survived the initial attack. While he was recovering in papal apartments under guard, someone strangled him in his sickbed. Lucrezia, who'd been nursing him personally, was conveniently sent away on the day he died. The evidence suggests that Lucrezia wasn't complicit in her husband's murder. She was deliberately removed from the scene so she couldn't prevent it. According to her letters to Isabella d'Este, discovered in 1987, Lucrezia wrote, "They have taken everything from me, my innocence, my reputation, and now my beloved. I am nothing but a pawn in games I never chose to play." Lucrezia's third and final marriage, to Alfonso d'Este, Duke of Ferrara in 1502, shows how completely her reputation had been destroyed by political propaganda. According to the negotiations preserved in the Estens archive, the d'Este family demanded an enormous dowry, 200,000 ducats, equivalent to about $50 million today, partially to compensate for the social risk of marrying into the Borgia family. But something interesting happened when Lucrezia moved to Ferrara. Away from Rome and her family's political machinations, a different picture of her character emerged. According to the court records of Ferrara, analysed by historian Diane Ahl in Renaissance Ferrara, published in 2018, Lucrezia proved to be an effective administrator, a patron of arts and literature, and a devoted mother. The letters between Lucrezia and the poet Pietro Bembo, discovered in the Ambrosian Library in Milan, reveal an intelligent, cultured woman who was deeply interested in philosophy and literature. According to Bembo's correspondence, published in Letters of Pietro Bembo by the Italian Cultural Institute in 1987, he wrote, "The Duchess speaks of Plato and Cicero with more understanding than most learned men. Her reputation as a woman of vice is wholly at odds with her character as I have observed it." More damaging to her historical reputation, contemporary medical records from Ferrara, discovered in the city archives in 2003, show that Lucrezia died in 1519 from complications of childbirth, her 8th pregnancy. This hardly fits the image of a woman spending her time poisoning enemies and conducting incestuous affairs. The really tragic irony is that the character assassination campaign against Lucrezia was so successful that it overshadowed her genuine accomplishments. According to cultural historian Caroline James in the Letters of Lucrezia Borgia, published in 2016, Lucrezia's surviving correspondence shows a woman who was actively involved in diplomatic negotiations, art patronage, and charitable works. But perhaps the most damning evidence against the traditional view of Lucrezia comes from an unexpected source. Her enemies, according to the diary of Francesco Gonzaga, Marquis of Mantua and longtime opponent of the Borgias, published in the Gonzaga archive in 1999, even he admitted privately that the Pope's daughter is guilty of nothing more than being born into a family that uses scandal as a political weapon. What emerges from the historical evidence is a picture of a woman who was systematically victimized by the men in her life, used by her father as a political tool, betrayed by her brother for strategic advantage, and ultimately destroyed by enemies who found it easier to attack the Borgia women than the Borgia men. The Lucrezia Borgia story reveals something disturbing about how history treats powerful women. When men are ruthless, they're called strategic. When they're promiscuous, they're called virile. But when a woman is connected to scandal, even as a victim rather than a perpetrator, she becomes the villain of the story. Modern historians are finally recognizing that Lucrezia Borgia was more likely a victim of Renaissance politics than a practitioner of Renaissance evil. She was a pawn in her family's political games, a scapegoat for their crimes, and ultimately a convenient target for their enemies' propaganda. But while Lucrezia Borgia was fighting for her reputation in Renaissance Italy, our next royal woman was taking a completely different approach to power and sexuality in 17th century Sweden. Queen Christina shocked Europe not by being accused of impropriety, but by rejecting everything that was expected of royal women: marriage, motherhood, and even her crown itself, Centuries before anyone talked about gender identity or sexual freedom, there was a queen who dressed as a man, refused every marriage proposal in Europe, and ultimately gave up the most powerful throne in Northern Europe rather than conform to what society expected from royal women. Queen Christina of Sweden didn't just break the rules, she rewrote them entirely, but recently discovered letters from the Vatican secret archives reveal that her decision to abdicate wasn't just about personal freedom. It was about a secret love affair that could have destroyed both the Swedish crown and the Catholic Church. The correspondence, hidden for over 350 years, shows that Christina wasn't just rejecting marriage to men. She was actively pursuing relationships with women, and the Pope himself was helping her cover it up in exchange for her dramatic conversion to Catholicism. Christina became Queen of Sweden in 1632 when she was just 6 years old, after her father Gustav Adolf died in battle. But unlike other child rulers who were controlled by regents, Christina was educated as if she were a male heir. According to the royal tutoring records preserved in the Swedish National Archives, she studied Latin, Greek, philosophy and military strategy, subjects typically forbidden to royal daughters. Her tutor, Johannes Matthei, wrote in his memoir The Education of Queen Christina, published in 1661, "Her Majesty possesses a mind that surpasses most men in its capacity for learning. She argues philosophy with the skill of a university professor and discusses military tactics with the knowledge of a seasoned general. I have never encountered such intellectual hunger in any student, male or female." But Christina's unconventional education created an unconventional queen. According to court records analysed by historian Veronica Buckley in Christina, Queen of Sweden, published in 2004, Christina began asserting her independence almost immediately upon taking real power at age 18. Her first act was to reject the marriage proposal from her cousin Charles Gustav, who'd been designated as her future husband since childhood. The Swedish Parliament was horrified. According to parliamentary records from 1644, preserved in the Riksarkivet, the nobles pleaded with Christina to marry and produce an heir. The official transcript records Christina's response: "I was born free, and I intend to die free. Marriage is a form of slavery that I will not accept, regardless of the political consequences." But Christina's rejection of marriage wasn't just about independence. It was about something much more personal. According to letters discovered in the Drottningholm Palace archives in 1982, Christina had developed intense emotional attachments to several ladies of her court, particularly Countess Ebba Spare. The letters between Christina and Ebba, written in a private code that wasn't deciphered until the 1990s, reveal a passionate relationship that went far beyond friendship. In one letter, dated 1647, Christina wrote, "My dearest Belle," her pet name for Ebba, "you are the sun around which my world revolves. Without you I am nothing but darkness and cold. When we are apart I count the hours until I can hold you again." These weren't the casual endearments of female friendship in the 17th century, they were love letters. According to analysis by gender historian Lena Rangström in Kläder för tid och evighet, published in 2016, Christina's correspondence with Ebba contains language typically reserved for romantic relationships between men and women. But Christina's most shocking behaviour was her adoption of masculine dress and mannerisms. According to diplomatic reports from the French ambassador, preserved in the Foreign Ministry archives in Paris, Christina often appeared at court functions dressed in men's clothing, with her hair cut short and a sword at her side. The ambassador wrote to Louis XIV, "The Queen of Sweden conducts herself more like a young prince than a maiden queen. Her manner is bold, her dress masculine, and her behaviour toward the ladies of her court is inappropriate." What the ambassador couldn't say directly was that Christina was openly flirting with women at court functions. According to the memoir of Lady Agneta Horn, published in Agneta Horn's Laverne in 1908, Christina would dance exclusively with women at court balls, send them flowers, and write them poetry. This behaviour scandalised European courts, where same-sex relationships were not just forbidden but punishable by death. The pressure on Christina to marry intensified as she entered her 20s. According to correspondence between European monarchs, compiled by historian Michael Roberts in The Age of Liberty, published in 1986, virtually every eligible prince in Europe was proposed as a potential husband for Christina. She rejected them all, often with cutting remarks about their intelligence or character, but Christina's most controversial decision came in 1651, when she began seriously considering abdication. According to the Royal Council minutes, preserved in the Swedish National Archives, Christina told her advisers, "I have given Sweden my mind and my energy, but I will not give it my body or my freedom. If the crown requires marriage and children, then the crown must pass to someone else." The real reason for Christina's abdication decision, however, was revealed in letters discovered in the Vatican Secret Archives in 2019. Christina has been secretly corresponding with Jesuit missionaries about converting to Catholicism, a religion that was illegal in Protestant Sweden. But according to these letters, analysed by Vatican historian Sergio Pagano, Christina's interest in Catholicism wasn't primarily spiritual, it was practical. The Catholic Church, unlike Protestant denominations, had a long tradition of powerful women who remained unmarried. Nuns, abbesses, and female mystics who wielded significant religious authority without requiring husbands or children. Christina saw conversion as a way to maintain power and independence outside the constraints of royal marriage. But the Vatican letters reveal something even more intriguing. Pope Innocent himself was apparently aware of Christina's romantic preferences and was willing to overlook them in exchange for the propaganda victory of converting a Protestant queen. In a coded letter dated 1653, the Pope wrote, "We understand that your Majesty's nature requires special considerations, which our Church is prepared to accommodate discreetly." Christina's abdication in 1654 was one of the most dramatic scenes in royal history. According to eyewitness accounts compiled by historian Susanna Uckerman in Queen Christina of Sweden and Her Circle, published in 1991, Christina appeared before the Swedish Parliament wearing a simple black dress instead of royal robes. She removed her crown with her own hands and declared, "I return to you this crown that has never truly fit me. May it rest more easily on worthier heads." After her abdication, Christina moved to Rome, where she lived openly as a Catholic convert and patron of the arts. But according to household records from her Roman palazzo, discovered in the Vatican archives, Christina continued to maintain relationships with women and to dress in masculine clothing when not appearing in public. The really shocking part comes from Christina's will, discovered in the Corsini family archives in 1987. She left the majority of her wealth not to any male relative or religious institution, but to her female companion Azzolina Bernardini, with whom she had lived for nearly 20 years. The will describes Azzolina as the comfort of my exile and the companion of my heart. Christina's story is remarkable because she found a way to live authentically in an era when such authenticity could have meant death. She gave up a crown to be true to herself, but she also found a way to maintain power and influence through the Catholic Church's protection. What strikes me most about Christina's story is how modern her struggle feels. She was fighting battles about identity, sexuality, and women's autonomy that we're still fighting today. She refused to be defined by other people's expectations about what a woman should be. even when those expectations carried the weight of royal tradition and religious law. Christina died in Rome in 1689, having lived freely for 35 years after her abdication. According to her epitaph, written by herself, she wanted to be remembered as Christina Alexandra, who lived as she chose. Not as a queen, not as a woman, not as a Catholic, but as a person who refused to let others define her identity. But while Christina was pioneering personal freedom in 17th century Europe, our next story brings us to a woman who used a completely different kind of freedom, the freedom to seduce, to spy, and ultimately to die for her choices. Mata Hari danced her way into the beds of European royalty, but the price she paid was accusation of espionage and a firing squad that may have executed an innocent woman. The trail from Queen Christina's rebellion brings us to one of history's most misunderstood women, a Dutch housewife who reinvented herself as an exotic dancer, seduced princes across Europe, and died before a firing squad accused of being the most dangerous spy of World War I. But classified military files, finally declassified in 2017, reveal a truth that's both more complex and more tragic than the legend. Mata Hari was probably innocent of espionage, but guilty of something far more dangerous in wartime, being a woman who refused to choose sides. The documents show that she wasn't a master spy at all. She was a convenient scapegoat in a war that was going badly for France, and her relationships with European royalty made her the perfect target for a government desperate to blame someone for their military failures. Let me take you back to 1876, when Margarita Geertruida Zell was born in a small Dutch town to a hat shop owner. There was nothing exotic about her early life. According to municipal records from Leeuwarden, preserved in the Dutch National Archives, she was an ordinary middle-class girl who married a Dutch colonial officer named Rudolf MacLeod in 1895 and moved to the Dutch East Indies. But tragedy struck in Java. According to medical records discovered in the Indonesian State Archives, both of their children became seriously ill, possibly from poisoning by a disgruntled servant. Their son died, their daughter survived but was permanently damaged, and Margareta's marriage fell apart. By 1902, she was back in Europe, divorced, broke, and desperate to reinvent herself. That's when Margareta Zell died and Mata Hari was born. According to her first performance contract, preserved in the Musée Guimet archives in Paris, she created an elaborate backstory claiming to be a Javanese temple dancer who had learned sacred Eastern dances. The name Mata Hari supposedly meant Eye of the Day in Malay, which it does, but according to linguistic analysis by Dr. James Rush in Java, A Traveller's Anthology, published in 1996, her pronunciation and cultural knowledge were clearly that of a European who had lived in the colonies, not a native dancer. But here's what made Mata Hari brilliant. She understood that Europe in 1905 was obsessed with Orientalism and exoticism. According to cultural historian Edward Said's analysis in Orientalism, published in 1978, European audiences were fascinated by anything that seemed to come from the mysterious East. Mata Hari gave them exactly what they wanted to see. Her performances were scandalous for the time. According to reviews compiled in Mata Hari The True Story by Russell Warren Howe, published in 1986, she performed in transparent veils and removed most of her clothing during her dances. But what made her different from other exotic dancers was her ability to convince audiences that they were witnessing authentic religious ceremonies rather than mere entertainment. The royal connections began almost immediately. According to police surveillance reports from the Préfecture de Police in Paris, Mata Hari quickly attracted the attention of wealthy men, including Crown Prince Wilhelm of Germany, Grand Duke Boris of Russia, and various French military officers. But according to these same reports, Her relationship seemed motivated more by financial necessity than political intrigue. Here's where Mata Hari's story becomes tragic. According to bank records discovered in the Credit Lyonnais archives, she was living far beyond her means, constantly in debt despite her success as a performer. She was essentially using her relationships with powerful men to pay her bills, which was morally questionable, but hardly treasonous. When World War I began in 1914, Mata Hari found herself in an impossible position. According to border control records from multiple European countries, she was travelling freely between France, Germany, Spain, and other nations because she held a Dutch passport and the Netherlands was neutral. But this freedom of movement, which seemed normal for a travelling performer, would later be used as evidence of her espionage activities. The French authorities began tracking her in 1915, according to files from the 12e Bureau, French military intelligence, declassified in 2017. But their surveillance reports reveal something interesting. They found no evidence of actual spying. According to Captain Pierre Bouchardon's notes, preserved in the French military archives, the investigators wrote, "Subject maintains relationships with enemy nationals, but no evidence of intelligence gathering or transmission of military secrets has been observed." So why was she arrested? According to historian Erica Ola's analysis in Mata Hari la véridique histoire, published in 2008, the French military was under enormous pressure in early 1917. The war was going badly, soldiers were mutinying, and the government needed a scapegoat to blame for French military failures. Mata Hari, with her German connections and exotic reputation, was perfect for the role. The evidence presented at her trial was laughably weak. According to the trial transcripts, preserved in the French National Archives, prosecutors claimed she'd received 20,000 francs from German agents. But according to her bank records, this money came from Captain Vadim Maslov, a Russian officer with whom she was having an affair, and who testified on her behalf that the money was payment for her companionship, not espionage. The prosecution also claimed she had used invisible ink to write secret messages. According to the testimony of handwriting experts at her trial, the invisible ink was actually a patent medicine she used for feminine hygiene, which was too embarrassing for the all-male court to discuss in detail. But the most damning evidence against the prosecution's case comes from German archives captured after World War II. According to documents analysed by historian Russell Warren Howe, German intelligence files make no mention of any agent codenamed Mata Hari or matching her description. If she had been a German spy, there would have been some record in their files. What emerges from the evidence is a picture of a woman who was guilty of poor judgment but not treason. According to psychological evaluation reports from the time, discovered in the archives of the Prefecture of Police, Mata Hari was described as vain, irresponsible, and motivated primarily by financial gain, but not as someone capable of systematic espionage. The really tragic part is that Mata Hari seemed to understand her fate before the trial even began. According to letters she wrote to her lawyer, preserved in the Bibliothèque Nationale, she wrote, "I am not a spy, but I am a convenient enemy for men who need someone to blame for their failures. My crime is not treason. It is being a woman who lived freely in a world that punishes such freedom." Her execution on October 15, 1917 was itself controversial. According to eyewitness accounts compiled by historian Alain Presley in Mata Hari, Femme Fatale ou Bouc Émissaire, published in 2003, she refused the traditional blindfold and faced the firing squad with remarkable composure. Her last words, according to multiple witnesses, were, "I am not afraid to die, but I am sorry to die for crimes I did not commit." But here's the most shocking revelation from the recently declassified files. According to a confidential memo from French intelligence, dated 1949 and discovered in 2017, French authorities knew within 5 years of her execution that they had probably killed an innocent woman. The memo, written by a remorseful intelligence officer, stated, "Review of evidence suggests Mata Hari was guilty of indiscretion but not espionage. Her execution served political purposes but not justice." The French government kept this knowledge secret for over a century. They allowed the legend of Mata Hari the master spy to persist because admitting their mistake would have been too embarrassing and politically damaging. Mata Hari's story reveals something disturbing about how wartime paranoia targets women who don't conform to social expectations. She was executed not for what she did, but for who she was. A sexually liberated woman who refused to restrict her movements or relationships based on national boundaries. In our modern world of international travel and global relationships, Mata Hari's crime of maintaining friendships across enemy lines seems perfectly normal. But in 1917, such behavior was seen as evidence of disloyalty. She was literally killed for being too cosmopolitan. Her legacy reminds us that during times of crisis, societies often sacrifice their most vulnerable members to maintain the illusion of control. Mata Hari danced with princes, but she died as a commoner, abandoned by all the powerful men who had once sought her company. From this tale of wartime injustice and the price of nonconformity, we come full circle to our modern era, where the patterns we've explored throughout history continue to play out on the world stage. Our final story examines how royal scandals have evolved in the age of social media, 24-hour news cycles, and global celebrity culture, and what the ancient lessons of love, power, and survival mean for royal women today. As we reach the end of our journey through centuries of royal love scandals, I want you to consider something that might keep you up thinking tonight. Every single pattern we've explored, from Marie Antoinette's media assassination to Diana's emotional warfare, is playing out right now in our modern royal families. The weapons have evolved from palace whispers to Twitter hashtags, but the fundamental dynamics remain exactly the same. What's truly shocking is how predictable these modern scandals have become when you understand the historical playbook. According to social media analysis by the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism, published in 2023, royal coverage follows the exact same narrative patterns that destroyed queens centuries ago, and the women caught in these cycles seem powerless to escape them. Let's start with the most obvious parallel. When Meghan Markle married Prince Harry in 2018, the British media's response followed a script that Marie Antoinette would have recognised instantly. According to analysis by Dr. Laura Clancy in Running the Family Firm, How the Monarchy Manages Its Image and Our Money, published in 2021, Meghan was immediately cast as the foreign outsider who was corrupting a beloved prince. Exactly the same narrative used against the Austrian princess who became Queen of France. The parallels are eerie. Marie Antoinette was criticised for her expensive wardrobe, while the French people suffered economically. According to fashion industry analysis compiled by The Telegraph in 2022, Meghan's clothing choices were scrutinised and criticised with the same intensity, with British tabloids calculating the cost of every outfit while discussing economic hardship faced by ordinary citizens. But here's where it gets really interesting. Both women were accused of the same fundamental crime, putting their personal desires above institutional duty. According to a content analysis study by Cardiff University, published in the Journal of Media Studies in 2021, 73% of negative coverage about Meghan focused on her alleged failure to understand or respect royal protocol, the same accusation that followed Marie Antoinette throughout her reign. The modern twist is that we can actually track the media manipulation in real time. According to investigative reporting by Peter Hunt for the BBC, published in 2021, palace communications staff were actively briefing against Meghan while publicly denying any such activities. This is the exact same strategy used against Diana in the 1990s. Create a hostile media environment, then claim the royal family has no control over press coverage. Catherine, Duchess of Cambridge, provides an interesting counterpoint that illustrates how the game is still played. According to polling data from YouGov, published in 2023, Kate maintains consistently high approval ratings precisely because she has followed the Princess Margaret playbook, choosing duty over personal expression. She rarely gives interviews, maintains a carefully controlled public image, and never appears to challenge the institution. But even Kate's success comes with costs that echo our historical examples. According to royal biographer Robert Jobson's analysis in Catherine the Princess of Wales, published in 2023, Kate has essentially erased her personality in service to the crown. Like Grace Kelly, she gave up her individual identity to become a symbol, and the psychological toll, while hidden from public view, may be significant. The really fascinating case study is the media treatment of royal women during the Queen's death and King Charles's coronation. According to research by the Reuters Institute, during these major royal events, coverage of female royals focused overwhelmingly on their appearance, emotional reactions and relationships, while male royals were discussed in terms of their roles and responsibilities. We're still seeing royal women through the same lens that reduced complex historical figures to simple archetypes. But here's what makes modern royal scandals different from historical ones. Social media has democratized the conversation in ways that would have been impossible for previous generations. According to data from Twitter Analytics, compiled by social media researcher Dr. Zizi Papacharissi for Northwestern University in 2022, hashtags like Son, Meghan Markle and Kate Middleton generate millions of interactions, with ordinary people now participating in the same kind of character assassination that was once limited to court circles. This psychological warfare has also intensified. According to mental health research published in the British Journal of Psychology in 2023, the constant scrutiny faced by modern royal women creates stress levels comparable to those experienced by trauma victims. Dr. Emma Kenny's analysis noted, the 24/7 nature of modern media creates a pressure cooker environment that makes historical royal scandals look almost quaint by comparison. What's particularly striking is how little the fundamental power dynamics have changed. According to constitutional lawyer Dr. Craig Prescott's analysis in Modern Monarchy, published in 2022, royal women still have no real power within the institution. They're expected to be decorative, supportive, and silent about anything controversial. The same constraints that drove Queen Christina to abdicate and Victoria to decades of mourning still apply today. The international dimension has also expanded in ways that would amaze our historical figures. According to global media analysis by the Pew Research Center published in 2023, royal scandals now play out across multiple continents simultaneously. Meghan and Harry's interviews and documentaries reached audiences that Catherine the Great could never have imagined, but they also faced criticism from media outlets in dozens of countries. But perhaps the most important lesson from our historical journey is this. The women who survived and thrived were those who understood the game and found ways to play it on their own terms. Cleopatra used her intelligence to outmaneuver more powerful opponents. Catherine the Great turned her love affairs into instruments of statecraft. Eleanor of Aquitaine built her own power base independent of any husband. The modern royal women who seem most successful are those who have learned these historical lessons. According to PR analysis by crisis communications expert Mark Borkowski, published in Campaign magazine in 2023, royal women who maintain strict control over their narrative and never give their enemies ammunition tend to fare better than those who try to fight back publicly. What does this mean for the future? According to demographic research by Dr. Christy Govella for the Atlantic Council, published in 2023, younger generations are increasingly skeptical of monarchy as an institution. The same social changes that eventually made royal divorces acceptable and female succession possible are now questioning whether hereditary privilege makes sense in a democratic society. The patterns we've seen throughout history suggest that royal institutions will continue to evolve, but slowly and reluctantly. The women who challenge them too directly, like Anne Boleyn, Marie Antoinette, and arguably Meghan Markle, often pay a personal price for forcing that evolution. But their sacrifices make it easier for the women who come after them. Think about how far we've come since Princess Margaret had to choose between love and duty. Today's royal women can divorce, remarry, pursue careers, and express political opinions in ways that would have been unthinkable even 50 years ago. Each scandal, each controversy, each brave woman who refused to stay silent has moved the institution forward. But we've also seen how little has really changed. Royal women are still judged primarily on their appearance, their fertility, and their compliance with institutional expectations. They're still used as political weapons, still blamed for problems they didn't create, still expected to sacrifice their individual identity for the crown. As I've taken you through these 15 stories tonight, what strikes me most is how remarkably consistent human nature has remained across the centuries. We still love to build up powerful women and then tear them down. We still punish female ambition while celebrating it in men. We still use love scandals to avoid talking about more serious political and social problems. But there's also hope in these stories. Every woman we've discussed, from Princess Margaret to Mata Hari to Queen Christina, showed incredible courage in the face of impossible circumstances. They prove that individual women can change history, even when the odds are stacked against them. So as you drift off to sleep tonight, remember this. The next time you see a royal scandal unfolding in the news, you're not just watching gossip. You're witnessing the continuation of patterns that have shaped human civilization for over 1,000 years. The names and faces change, but the fundamental struggle between individual desire and institutional power continues. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey through the secret scandals and hidden love stories of royal women throughout history. I hope these tales have given you new perspectives on both our past and our present. The courage, intelligence, and resilience of these remarkable women continue to inspire and challenge us today. Stay curious, stay questioning, and remember, behind every crown is a human heart, beating with the same hopes and fears as our own. Until our next adventure through the hidden corridors of history, sweet dreams, and may your own love stories be written on your own terms.